This public hearing conducted by the Committee on Appropriations Adjudication will not come to order. Notice of the public hearing was disseminated to all local media outlets via electronic format on Tuesday, September the 12th, 2017, with the second notice provided Saturday, September 16th. Notice of the hearing was also made known on the Guam Legislature's website. The committee has only one item on this morning's agenda, and that's Bill 157-34, introduced by Senator Frank Uggan, an act. I'll let him read the title and give a short introduction of the bill.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, and to our fellow colleagues, to everyone in attendance today and those who are watching this particular discussion. This is Bill number 157-34, as relative to authorizing Jose D. Leon Guerrero Commercial Port to issue revenue bonds and other indebtedness for the purpose of financing or refinancing improvements and or working capital relating to the Jose D. Leon Guerrero Commercial Port and other related facilities and operations of the Jose D. Leon Guerrero Commercial Port, and approving the terms and conditions of the issuance of one or more series of such bonds pursuant to such article for such purposes. And that's the title of Bill number 157-34. Mr. Speaker, as I provide initial comments, I want to just highlight and certainly enlighten the committee that anywhere from 90 to 95% of all our commodities and goods come through the Port Authority of Guam. It's a critical service that our men and women at the Port Authority continue to provide every single day, 24/7. And Mr. Speaker, also this particular provision would authorize the Port Authority to borrow up to $80 million. And I need to highlight that part of the $80 million is inclusive of refinancing 2 or 3 of their outstanding loans that they presently have. And this is a revenue bond proposal in which, and just for everyone to understand, in which the revenues that are generated by the Port Authority of Guam will be utilized specifically to pay off this outstanding debt obligation. So it's whatever revenues are generated above and beyond the operational requirements, those proceeds will be used to pay off this bond should this legislation be passed into law. Also, another thing, Mr. Speaker, I know that Senator Brown and her team are going to be providing testimony this morning, and perhaps I will discuss that during the course of our questions to the members of the Port Authority, but there have been issues with regards to the administration building. And I need to make this general comment at the onset. The question is, do we want to finance the construction of a brand new administration building, which would be ADA compliant, which would replace an existing structure, administration building that is 50 plus years old? Do we want to pay $17.5 million today based on the initial presentation, or do we want to pay significantly more in 5 or 10 years from today? Because we know that that particular structure is certainly in need of being replaced. And aside from that, should this structure be approved by the legislative body for a brand new administration building, it would clear the area where the existing administration building is located and allow for additional parking spaces or storage spaces for use by the Port Authority and many of their customers. So I'll have the Port Authority representatives and Senator Brown give their presentation. But Mr. Speaker, I thank you for having this public hearing, and I certainly look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I want to welcome my colleagues that are here. Senator Regine Lee, Senator Jim Espaldon, Senator Tom Atta, and Senator Mary Camacho Torres, Senator Will Castro, and the Vice Speaker, Therese Terlaje. Senator Brown, you're welcome, and the Chairman, whoever's going to lead them.
Okay. Alpha Day, Mr. Speaker, and members of your committee, and I believe you have a strong committee that confronted us this morning. And once again, myself, my name is Francisco Santos. I'm the chairman for the Port Authority of Guam. Myself and my staff, my management, and the stakeholders, and our port employees, we are here, and we are humble, to be here this morning to ask your support to please help us in supporting this Bill 157-34 to upgrade our facility at the port. We believe that at present time, we have the world-class port in this side of the Pacific, and we want to keep it that way. We believe that the port is the lifeline of the island of Guam. We want to upgrade our facility. We all know that our facility is so old, but because of the hard work of our people, we continue to upgrade and maintain our facility. But we need funding to upgrade our facility to make it more better, to accommodate any type of vessel that will call Guam, and to operate any vessel also, not only commercial, but also military vessel. So this morning, I beg and I humble myself and my fellow management and port employees to please help us and support this Bill 157-34. And now I'll turn this thing over to my General Manager, Ms. Joanne Brown.
Thank you very much, Chairman Santos, and certainly Speaker Cruz. Thank you for scheduling this public hearing to allow us to provide our formal testimony with regards to Bill 157, and certainly to the author of the legislation, Senator Frank Uggan. Thank you for your support in introducing this bill. Mr. Chairman, as you can see, I did submit formal testimony. It's about 4 pages long. But to maximize our time this morning while we're here, I will go ahead and defer to the members of our management team that will provide a slide presentation which essentially outlines a lot of the information that's in the written testimony. So if you'll allow me to do that, I think that will help facilitate time. And then later, after the presentations are done, if you have any questions for us, we'll be more than happy to respond to them.
Of course. Decision's yours. Al, Mr. Duenas? I guess you have a slide presentation? Yes,
I will call up, and our Deputy for Administration and Finance, Alfred Duenas, certainly at a portion there with regards to bond financing, will be able to elaborate on that part of the presentation. But for the, in terms of the outline with regards to the Hotel Wharf and Access Road, Mr. Joe Havilana from our Planning Division will present that section, if he can come up. For the construction of the new administration building is Glenn Nelson. For the replacement and relocations of our water lines is our operations manager, John Santos. For the repair to the EQMR, which is the Equipment Maintenance Warehouse and Warehouse 1 building, that will be Ernie Candeleta, who's the head of our maintenance division. And for the repair of Gulf Pier will be Simeon De Los Santos, who's our engineer, to be able to do that presentation. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Speaker.
Whoever can proceed.
Good morning, Honorable Speaker Benjamin J.F. Cruz, Vice Speaker Therese Terlahi, Secretary Regine Lee, Senator Mary Torres, Senator Tom Ada, Senator James Baldon, Senator Frank Uggan Jr., and Senator Will Castro. My name is Joe Havilana. I am a planner and the Port Security Grant Program Manager at the Port Authority of Guam. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for conducting this public hearing on Bill 157-34. I also want to thank Senator Frank Uggan Jr., Senator Jim Espaldon, Senator Jyoti San Augustine, and Senator Will Castro for co-sponsoring the bill. Mr. Speaker, Bill 157-34 is a critical piece of legislation that is a great value to the port. As background information, the legislative approval of the 2007 Port Master Plan and the subsequent update in 2013 provided a roadmap to guide the port in its modernization efforts. Of course, that's in preparation for the much anticipated military buildup. In a nutshell, the 2013 Master Plan update divided the planned projects into 2 separate categories. One is port modernization projects, and the other is sustainability projects. The Port Modernization Program projects, or the PMP projects, were anticipated to be funded by sources like MERIT CIP grant program, federal programs like Tiger Grant, USDA, DOI, EDA, the Port Security Grant program from FEMA, and of course, port funds and sources. Sustainability projects apply to both old and new facilities and equipment. In fact, the range of activities identified in the 2013 Master Plan update included maintenance and repairs, retrofit and renovation, and eventual replacement projects. Those were identified in the 2013 Master Plan. Mr. Speaker, during the past several years, the Port has taken its Master Plan and has been very proactive in executing and completing several PMP projects. This was evident in the completion of the Guam Commercial Port Improvement Program that was funded by USDOD funds in the tune of $50 million and administered by MERAD. Upgrades to the Hagatna and Agat marinas funded by DOI, USDA and EDA grants, and over $11 million in port security grant programs that have greatly enhanced the port's maritime and port security posture to include its core capabilities and its port resiliency. Mr. Speaker, the projects that are included in Bill 157-34 are sustainability projects that are equally important as many of the completed PMP projects. To ensure that Guam's only seaport continues to provide the necessary services for commerce to freely flow through the port, it is critically important that these projects must be funded to provide port management and personnel with effective and efficient tools to support day-to-day operations. The first and the most important sustainability project is the renovation of Hotel Wharf. Next slide. Mr. Speaker, this project involves construction that are phased in two separate components. The first one is the replacement of the Hotel Wharf structure itself, along with adjacent upland facilities to include a fire system and a load center. The second part of the construction project is a 4,200-foot-long rehabilitation of a two-way access road that includes the installation of water lines, data conduits, and storm drains. After several attempts in the past that many of us are aware, through the USDOT Tiger Grant, we finally were able to be successful during the last year. The USDOT awarded the port Tiger Grant the amount of $10 million. The port's required and needed portion of that, or cost share of that, is $14.2 million. Why is it important to rehabilitate this facility? Well, since the construction of Hotel Wharf back in 1948 as an ammunition ammo, loading and unloading, and its eventual turnover to the government of Guam in 1989, there's really not much improvement made to that 500-foot-long structure. As a result of its age, natural wear and tear, and extremely corrosive port environment, there's a lot of damages that have accumulated through the years, particularly the deterioration of the asphalt surface, corrosion of sheet piles and the bulkhead, deterioration of bollards, cleats, tie rods, and wharf fender system with many missing components. When completed, the berthing capacity will alleviate the traffic and the congestion at the main yard. Next slide. It also is going to provide additional space for project-specific activities that in the past have been relegated to the container yard, and it impacts the container cargo and the break bulk operations. So with this added capacity, activities that are not limited to aggregate and construction materials, loading and unloading, cruise ships, passenger liner, docking, and even roll-off and roll-on operations will be able to move freely and without having to hamper the main yard. It will also provide an alternate location for DoD operations in the event that is needed. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, The new facility, when completed, will provide business opportunities that may not otherwise be attainable at the main yard. Next slide. This particular view is a bird's eye view of the hotel wharf. Again, when this is completed, we're going to have an asset that is going to provide the additional activities that's otherwise not feasible or will not hamper regular day-to-day operations at the main yard. Next slide. These pictures are of the asphalt surface. Through time, there's deterioration and cracks in the surface itself through normal wear and the 1993 earthquake. Next slide. If you can see there, there's a visual of the damage and corrosion in the bollards, the cleats, and the tie downs, as well as on the right picture, which is actually a surface picture of the sheet pile bulkhead. And you can see that if it's corroded towards the surface, there's an assumption that even the subsurface is equally damaged. Again, this is a critical component of the port's sustainability projects, and we greatly appreciate your support in getting this funded through Bill 157-34. That concludes my presentation. I now turn it over to Mr. Glenn Nelson, who is going to highlight the next project.
Please.
Hi, good morning. My name is Glenn Nelson with the Port's Commercial Division. Basically, the role we play with the Port is that we oversee all the real properties, the tank farms, the marinas, the offices, and the warehouses. In doing so, we account for as much as 24, at least based on end year 16 numbers, 24% of the revenues that were realized by the Port last year. I would like to thank you for this opportunity to present testimony or to present this matter before you. The next project that I'm going to be speaking about is the replacement of the admin building. I have come to realize that there have been some concerns had with this proposed endeavor, but in doing so, I would offer the following. Basically, the description of the project is the design and construction of a new admin building to replace our existing. And it's the purpose of which will be to support the Port needs as well as that of our tenants. The reason why we should do so is the building is 50 years old, as Chairman Luggan had stated earlier. No major renovation or expansion since the original construction, other than those that were needed based on typhoons, fires, earthquakes, and stuff of that nature. And while the first floor does meet the ADA standards, the second floor does not. So basically, it's an ADA non-compliant facility. And by undertaking this endeavor, we are cognizant of the fact that by replacing this building or demolishing it in its present location and replacing it with a new building elsewhere, it will afford additional space to accommodate further Port operational requirements. And that's being said more so on the equipment maintenance aspect of the Port operations. And obviously, a new facility will allow us to effect commerce in a safe and in a safe building in an efficient manner, as well as to accommodate our partners who are deserving of a new office setting where they don't have to worry about the ceilings falling down or spallings falling down or things hidden beneath the tiles, things not seen, but you got cracks cracks that are hidden. You have a two-story building, basically. Yeah, I'm sorry, next slide, ma'am. This is the existing building, and as you see where it's noted, the building around with this parking lot, in removing this building, and it will afford that entire area to support the equipment maintenance component, which is to the right, or the southern portion of the screen, if you were to orientate that overlay. Next slide, ma'am. This is the interior of the building, basically seen. Basically seen is unacceptable. You're dealing with facilities and equipment and structures that have been in place for so many years that have just come to a point of disrepair. Next slide, please. What you see here is a result of a June 2015 fire that originated on the first floor of the admin building. While the fire was contained to a small area within the first floor, the indirect damages resulting from affected the entire building. Next slide, please. And these are just simple shots of certain things that we have to contend with this building. Although it's masked with the beautiful blue color paint, you will come to see that there's major spalling issues that do exist throughout that facility, from the stairs to even the wall, the window panels. Next slide, please. Now this is very telling. Basically what you have here is the northeast portion of the port admin building roof. If you notice, it was stripped down to the rebar just so we could resurface it. Because what was happening is, because of the age of this facility and due to the exposures to seismic events over the years, we had leaks coming from the roof to the first floor. This project was actually completed. And I say that while this project was completed, again, this is only the northeast portion of the roof. We still got other sections of the roof that need to be addressed. Next slide, please. Now, with the intent of demolishing the existing to accommodate operational requirements and replace the existing, we were challenged with identifying proposed locations. 2 locations currently identified for this purpose are on the eastern edge of the port property, across the GPA power plant, in an area, although identified as Old Hawaiian Rock, it is also formerly known as the Cabras Island Industrial Park, as well as across the street where the old Seamen's Club had used to sit many, many years ago. Both these areas, and the reason why we had chosen 2, while one, we could easily say one's preferred over the other, ultimately we are aware of the fact that projects of this nature are going to be cost-driven. To the point where will it be economically feasible enough to construct based on the civil requirements needed for each site. So some decisions still need to be made with regards to the actual location of the building. But these are 2 potential sites. Next slide, ma'am. Okay, well, that concludes that portion of the admin presentation. Now I would like to turn it over to Mr. Simeon De Los Santos. I'm sorry, Operations Manager and Acting Deputy General Manager for Operations, Mr. John Santos.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, members of the committee. My name is John Santos. I'm the Operations Manager for the Port Authority of Guam. Representing the replacement and relocation of water lines. So this is one of the critical projects for the port. The project description: replacement of existing damaged water lines in the port's container yard, relocation of the main line from inside the yard to outside the perimeter along Route 11. So there'll be a map later on in the this presentation that will show Guam Waterworks main line cutting through our whole container yard. right, which is under basically where we all work. Our justification, water lines at the port over 50 years old. Pressurized testing resulting in findings of several leaks throughout the yard, and I'll speak more on that as we go along with the presentation. Some of the existing line pipes are asbestos-based. New lines within the yard will eliminate leaks and ensure safe potable water. Improved water pressure will result in the United States Coast Guard required 90 psi for firefighting operations, also for the NFPA. So basically, the port has the lines within the yard, but we also have our fire hydrants on the surface. We're required by the Coast Guard or by the Code of Federal Regulation to ensure that at least these fire hydrants have at least 90% PSI for firefighting capabilities. We're way below that right now. Relocation of the main line along Route 11, as I mentioned earlier, provides for unobstructed and undisturbed yard operations in the event of repairs. Next slide, Marge. Here we see basically the leaks in the past 3 years in the yard starting in 2015. But even prior to that, we've had other major leaks within the container yard or in the waterfront. The most recent was in April of this year around the Ikemar area. Next slide. Now this is a video I'd like to show you or present so that you can see when we talk about a leak within the yard. Go ahead and press play, March. The hole is small from the top, but if you look, it has saturated and it has grown under.
But outside looks small.
Next slide, March. Here's an example. This is the waterfront. You can see a major erosion of container yard due to water leaks. When we have a leak like this, you see our shoreside crane, our gantries. This kind of leak, we have heavy equipment running up and down 24/7 during operations. So you saw how, on the video, how small that hole was, but basically how wide it was. This disrupts our operation. It slows down our operation, our efficiency, our productivity, and we've had a lot of leaks. It's not something that we just repair overnight. It actually disrupts our operation. So when the vessels come in, we're talking about hatch covers, hatch lids that have to be thrown behind the gantry. For many years, we've worked with Guam Water Works. They've actually come in to work with us to try and, with the water leak detection team. We schedule them, they'll come in, we'll find one leak, we'll fix one, the other one will pop up again. So you have all these leaks all over the yards and the waterfront that compromises the integrity of our structures. These leaks, these repairs just don't happen overnight. So basically our guys, when they're running 24/7, they have to go around all these obstacles. Sometimes they'll be open for almost a month, depending on how we address with Guam Water Works or go out for bids to repair this. So it is a very pressing matter for us in operations or even for the port itself. In the event there is no water or pressure can't maintain our firefighting, there's nothing stopping the United States Coast Guard from actually shutting down the port, right, and giving us restricted, though we do have fire pumps in place in the event of a major water outage. Some of these leaks, because we cannot fully pressurize, whenever we have to isolate portions of the yard, it's very costly to the port. 24/7 until such time it's repaired, the port has had to have employees from the facility come in on day and night and monitor. We work with the fire department and the Coast Guard, we give them notice so that we're able to shift water around in case of a fire. So it's been very costly, all these leaks, right? Not only unsafe in the operations, our firefighting capability has diminished. It's been very costly to have personnel come in 24/7 just to monitor. Next slide, please. This is a port diagram. As you can see in the blue line, sorry, I don't have a PowerPoint. The blue line represents the existing lines. The port, I mean, these lines are 50 years old. I'm 30 service the port, so you can imagine. The port has expanded at least twice. When the port expanded the first time, the meter was outside of the port, but they've expanded over that master meter. We try to work with Guam Waterworks and the rest to see if we can move their line outside of the yard, which now shows the red line out along Route 11. Moving this line out would, if there's, it would assist us so that if there's, or even Guam Waterworks, so if there's any type of break, they should be able to respond for it outside of the controlled area and will not disrupt our day-to-day operations. So again, it's vital for us in operations or for the port as a whole to have these lines replaced sooner rather than later. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to present my next speaker, which is my colleague, Mr. Ernie Candeleta, who's the Equipment Maintenance Manager.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker and members of the committee. My name is Ernest Candeleta. I'm the maintenance manager of the port. I'd like to do a presentation on the repair of EQMR, which is the Equipment Maintenance and Repair and Warehouse number 1. Project description is the repair and upgrade of these 50-year-old structures in compliance with the latest building codes. Deficiencies includes electrical, plumbing, significant concrete spalling, as you will see on the slides to be presented, and exposed rebar, and also leaks. Justification is to address the extreme safety hazards and unsafe working environment for PAG maintenance and operations personnel and port tenants and users, and also to provide shelter and protection from the corrosive environment for major port equipment housed in these structures. As you can see on the upper slide, that's the equipment maintenance and repair building. That's one of the buildings that's being addressed with the spalling and leaks. Below, you can see the evidence that there's water stains on the bond beams, which is leaking in the interior of the warehouse. When it rains outside, it also rains inside. Next slide, please. Here, this pretty much a bigger view of the leaks on the bond beams of the maintenance warehouse. Next slide, please. This is the exterior of the EQMR warehouse. You can see the actually, you can see some of the repairs that were done on the spalling, but it's too significant. The spalling is just continuous, and also the leaks really need to be addressed in this area. Next slide, please. Here you can see some of the spallings. Some of these were removed by our personnel due to safety reasons. We see that because at times they just fall. We don't want personnel to get injured and stuff like that. So we do schedule our personnel to go around, do inspection, and remove the loose areas, the loose spalling. Next slide, please. Okay, this is warehouse number 1. This is the top portion shows the exterior water side, and also that's the bottom pictures or slides show the interior as well. On the bond beams, you can see the evidence of water leaks. Next slide, please. Here you can see massive spalling. And also, if you really come up close to this slide or you've been to that area, the structure's starting to buckle. It's really bad. It's an unsafe area right now as we speak. So, this was the former salt factory back in the day. Next slide, please. Here also you can see in the exterior, the major spalling and warehouse number 1. That's the wing. Okay, next slide, please. And here the other pictures as well. And also in some of the, as you can see on the bottom right side, the slide, you can see some of our equipment that are also stored in the building due to just to protect it from the the environment that we have down at the port. Next slide, please. Here you can see some evidence of the spalls falling. Sometimes we come in the morning, you see spalls on the ground. So that shows us that this building is unsafe, but we have a crew that goes around and inspects for these things and has, we have them removed right away for the safety of our employees. Next slide, please. Here we have some equipment stored inside the warehouse for just to protect against inclement weather, which you see here we have the fire pumps, and also you might see maybe on the left slide the light plant. Next slide, please. Okay, that concludes my presentation. I want to turn it over to Mr. Simeon de los Santos, who will be doing his own presentation. Mr. Simeon.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker and members of this committee. Yesterday, the general manager asked me, among the 5 projects, which one would you want to present? And I told her I'll present a mobile pier. Basically, it's a project that's very close to me because 30 years ago, it was one of the first projects that I completed back in 1987. So just to give you a brief history of mobile pier, mobile pier was once a timber pier. It's a wooden timber pier with wooden pilings. It got battered over many, many years from typhoons, and then it came very, very close to being condemned by the Coast Guard. So in '87, with the DOI funds, we rebuilt it to a modern pier, concrete and using steel pilings. And since then, there has been very, very little maintenance on that pier. Other than early 2000, when we got some monies from our insurance company, we did some cosmetic work. So let me move forward with the project description. Next slide, please. Project description for the repairs of Gulf Pier. Replacement of pilings and concrete bulkhead. We'll do the upgrading of the walking surface to graphite materials to meet the U.S. Coast Guard requirements. Installation of catwalks to mooring dolphins, currently inaccessible. And we're going to upgrade the security fencing. Justification. The pier is port-owned. It's one of 2 fuel piers. In addition to the Gulf Pier discharging fuel, it also discharges cement from a nearby private company that's located there. It's managed by Mobil Oil Guam, and it's mainly used as a fueling pier. Upgrades of pilings and bulkheads extends pier life. The replacement of the walking surface ensures personal safety, and the installation of catwalks to dolphins eliminate the needs for vessels to be tied down to shore, bollards, and provide escape paths in the event of a fire. Currently, all of the shore or the mooring dolphins are on the shoreline, so there is no access. They have to go back to land and walk. Next slide, please. This is a typical underwater photograph of the pilings that supports the superstructure of the decking of the pier. if you look at the piece of metal or the bracket that's sticking out, those are what we call sacrificial anodes. And normally what it does, it would suspend a big chunk of zinc anodes. So rather than the salt water or the corrosion attacking the pilings, it protects it and it attacks the zinc anodes instead. As you can see, there is no zinc anodes left. It has already basically corroded away. So there's zero protection on these pilings. Next slide, please. This is another typical photograph underneath the wharf or underneath the pier. The one on the left side is the corner of the pier. There's two different types of piling systems there. You have one vertical, and then you have one that's kind of on an angle. And the ones on an angle are called batter piles. And what they do is they protect the pier from any lateral movements. And the vertical one is basically for horizontal and bearing loads. This is a very typical condition of all of the piers, all of the pilings underneath, from the top to the very bottom, below the mean low water mark. All of this has to be replaced one by one. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, Vice Speaker Terlahi, and Chairman Frank Hagen Jr., and members of the Legislature. My name is Alfred Duenas, and I'm pretty much here to discuss the bond financing. Prior to the bond financing and everything else, all construction projects will be properly permitted by local and federal regulatory entities and as required. I want to make sure that we make that up front, that we will comply with all regulations. Public Law 30-52 placed the Jose de Leon Guerrero Commercial Port of Guam under the oversight of the Public Utility Commission. On November 16, 2016, Port Authority submitted a 5-year tariff petition to PUC in support of our intent to finance the capital improvement needs and to cover our operation expenses. The collaborative efforts by the Port Authority of Guam with its consultants, WSP, formerly Parsons Brinkerhoff, and the PUC's consultant, Slater Nakamura, produced a framework for Port Authority of Guam's Docket 1701, which is Port Authority's 5-year tariff petition. These efforts included numerous conference calls between Port Authority of Guam, WSP, and Slater Nakamura. It also included a visit by WSP to the office of Slater Nakamura to review the forecast model developed by WSP. Slater Nakamura examined whether the multi-year rate plan will be sufficient to cover Port Authority of Guam's operating costs, capital investments, and debt service. Slater Nakamura determined that the projected growth rates and baseline volumes for cargo throughput are extremely conservative, and therefore the revenue projections developed from these projections are also conservative and achievable. In the development of the container cargo volume forecast, the Port Authority of Guam consultant used 2015 as the base year for the acceleration at a 1.1% annual growth rate between 2016 and 2020, and a more conservative 0.9 growth rate in 2021 and beyond. WSP's cash flow forecast assumes that the planned projects will be funded by approximately $41.7 million of new bonded debt in 2018. The annual debt service will be approximately $3.1 million. The debt service for the existing loans is already part of the existing cash flow, and only those that meet the threshold of the 2% savings would be refinanced. WSP assumed an interest rate on the debt of 5.9% and a target credit rating of BBB minus. That's the lowest investment grade rating. There are some variables beyond normal market movements that may, at a minimum, affect the actual interest rate on the debt. One of the more serious discussion and everything else between WSP, Port Authority of Guam, and Slater Nakamura had to do with the salary component for the Port Authority of Guam. On August 27, 2009, the Port Authority of Guam Board of Directors adopted Board Resolution 9-06 to bring the port's pay structure to a reasonable level comparable to port industry standards at the 50 market percentile. The port is to implement its new compensation plan and applied its first pay adjustment at the 10% market percentile level and thereafter. The port was to perform subsequent salary adjustments for the next 10 years to complete the 50% market percentile level by 2019. On July 25th of 2016, the Port Authority Board of Directors adopted Resolution number 2016-04 to update the pay schedule using the 2014 market data. By comparison, the 2008 market data at the 50 percentile is equivalent to the 2014 market data at the 25th market percentile. The board authorized migration to the 25th percentile of the 2014 market data for the next 3 years to be completed by 2019, subject to the availability of funds and contingent upon the port realizing its annual revenue projections for each of the 3 years. Salaries, wages, and benefits total about 55% of total operating expense. Port Authority of Guam, WSP, and Slater Nakamura all recognize that the current increment increases are not sustainable. Since Port Authority of Guam will be reaching the targeted market percentile by 2019, Port Authority of Guam would propose an amendment to Chapter 6, Section 6.003, Pay Actions Related to Increments. Salary increments will be proposed to change from the current range of 0% to 6% to a range of 0% to 3%. And we will be making that proposal to our Oversight Chair, Senator Uggan, to introduce legislation to effectuate such action. And that pretty much concludes my presentation. The slide that we have pretty much shows what the cash flow projection is, and I provided this information to you, Mr. Speaker, shortly after our informational hearing.
I think you should probably put whatever you want on the record at this point, so that either that or supplement your testimony, so that the committee report has that. What you provided to me a couple of months ago was unofficial, and so I'd like that submitted formally so that it can be included in the record. Okay.
In addition to that, I would also
or at least instructions from you that that's what you want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we certainly have no problem.
No, I think it's imperative that the committee
for reference
be fully
of yourself and the committee.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I would also submit the cash flow report and analysis for a $70 million debt repayment. What I gave you earlier was pretty much for the 41 million debt payment. So we would update our cash flow to show payment and to show the throughput to substantiate and support the projection.
Okay, so we'll await your submittal of that, since you're asking for more than what was, and just update it and provide it to us. Did you want to conclude?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, that provides the overall presentation on behalf of the port, and as we mentioned, at your discretion, we're certainly available to respond to any questions. I do know there are other parties here that desire to provide testimony, including one of our major carriers that are here. So we certainly can sit back, or if you want to ask us the questions now, we defer to you to let us know.
Why don't I do this? Why don't, if you will wait, let's hear everybody else, and
Sure.
then we'll have you come back up to ask the questions. I think if that's all right with the committee, because I don't want everybody waiting who isn't.
No problem.
Okay.
We'll wait. We'll be here.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hurecki?
Thank you, Speaker Cruz, Vice Speaker Terlahi, Chairman Uggan, and members of the committee. My name is Fred Hurecki. I'm the Administrative Law Judge for the Public Utilities Commission, and I'm here today testifying on behalf of Chairman Johnson, Jeff Johnson, of the PUC. Dr. Johnson appreciates the opportunity to comment on this bill, and basically, he wanted to convey the role of the PUC since 2009 as the regulatory oversight body for the port. At that time, basically, the PUC was confronted with an entity that had a substantial need for additional funding to undertake a number of projects. And in addition, the thought at that time was that the port's revenues and rates were really not sufficient to pay for these operations that it needed and the upgrades that it needed. So we believe that the port was placed under the jurisdiction of the PUC in part to try to improve its financial condition, to help it modernize its operations, and even, in fact, to assist it perhaps in improving its conditions so that it could be eligible to participate in the bond market. For various reasons that are stated in the written testimony, Dr. Johnson, as the chairman, does support Bill 157 and does urge that the legislature adopt it. Since 2009, the PUC has done a number of things to try to strengthen the operations of the port. It, with the port's participation, modeled a contract review protocol where all the major obligations of the port, the loan obligations that you see in the presentation, came before the PUC and were approved. And it could also be added, as I think was mentioned, any of these projects, even if they're approved for bond financing, not only does the PUC have to approve the bond issuance itself, but each project that exceeds $1 million comes before the PUC for a separate independent review. So that's a part of this process too, even after the bond is issued. That's under the contract review protocol. In addition, there have been a number of rate proceedings since 2009. I was able to view at least 3. And I think the general perception of the PUC was that the port's rates were never sufficient to support its operations. And that is likely why on 3 occasions the PUC did raise the rates of the port. In fact, I think the second increase, the port had come in for a 1-year rate increase. But at that time, the PUC and its consultants advised the port that it really needed a 5-year rate plan to adequately fund its operations. And as a general matter, I believe that the port consultants felt that the rates requested by the port were conservative. In fact, questionably, maybe not even fully adequate to support its operations. So the PUC consultants felt that the port definitely needed additional revenues to fund these various repairs that they're now seeking through the bond issuance. These rate increases were specifically implemented with the understanding that the revenues generated from the 5-year rate plan would assist the port in funding its priority projects and to pay debt service to the port's current loans and future bond financing. As was mentioned, there is now a 5-year rate plan. It's basically a 7%, 7%, 1%, 1%, 1% plan for the next 5 years. I think the PUC was certainly aware at all times that the ultimate goal was for the port to secure bond financing and to use the funds from the rate increase to pay existing loan obligations as well as the debt service for bond issuance. It appears that the projects that the port seeks to undertake have generally been approved in the master plan update from 2013. The port has presented justifications to the PUC and its consultants for the necessity of financing the capital improvement projects outlined in the Port of Guam Master Plan 2013 report. And I don't need to go over the projects again, but it also has seemed to the PUC, in addition even viewing the facilities at the port, that there is really a serious need to improve the facilities. There's been, in many cases, no upgrades to some of the facilities since the 1960s and 1970s. So it does seem to us that would be an appropriate expenditure of the funds. The loans included in this refinancing, which I think total approximately $30 million, those generally have come before the PUC, have been approved by the PUC, and the PUC does believe that the repayment of these loans through bond issuance would further improve the condition of the port. If the port were going to rely alone only on its revenues, I don't believe that the revenues each year that is above its operational expenses are really sufficient to fund the improvements that it needs. Dr. Johnson was pleased that the bill before the legislature does protect the role of the PUC in reviewing the issuance terms and conditions of the bonds, and that the bonds cannot be issued without the approval of the PUC. And the PUC takes this role very seriously. It does not rubber stamp requests by the utilities to issue bonds, as you know from some of the prior legislation. We carefully, in each case, look at whether the bond funding makes sense in terms of the impact on the rates to the ratepayers, and that role would be exercised here in the event that the bond issuance is approved. Bill 15734 also includes the pledge of the government that it will maintain the rights, powers, and duties of the Public Utilities Commission to fulfill the terms of agreements with the bondholders. So we think the legislation is appropriate. We think that the authorization for the port to issue revenue bonds and undertake the other measures included in Bill 15734 is the next logical step in the culmination of the regulatory efforts that PUC has undertaken over the last 9 years. Dr. Johnson therefore requests that the legislature approve Bill 15734. While he's speaking for himself, because this matter has not come before the commissioners of the PUC, he does believe that they will favorably view authorization for the PAG to issue revenue bonds when that matter comes before the PUC. We appreciate your consideration of Dr. Johnson's testimony, and at the appropriate time, I'd be willing to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hrebecki, and thank Dr. Johnson for providing that testimony. I note that approval of this is going to be on the 28th. It's on the agenda for your meeting on the 28th of the month?
This matter? No. The Speaker, the testimony is just presented for informational purposes to the commissioners, but there's no formal matter before the PUC for consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was there any other person who wished to testify? Mr. Leon Guerrero, you're recognized to come up. Anybody else? Come on up. Anybody else wish to testify? We'll start with Mr. Munya, who had signed up. And then Mr. Netidug. Go ahead. Can I be up here?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, Vice Speaker Talai, committee members. My name is Stephen Munya from the village of Miguelon. I am a contract management administrator with the procurement office at the Port Authority of Guam. I am here today to testify in support of Bill 15734 on the port's efforts to seek bond financing for capital improvement projects at the Jose de Leon Guerrero Commercial Port. I've been employed at the Port Authority for 2 years now. I have seen the tremendous effort by our leadership and management team to provide the newest and best equipment for our operators and mechanics to perform their duties and responsibilities safely and efficiently on a day-to-day basis. Now our leadership and management team would like to do the same for our administrative staff, our tenants, our customers, and visitors. We want to secure bond financing to provide a new, safe, secure, and environmentally friendly administrative complex, a LEED green building. I want to share a story of my short time working at the port and working in the current administration building. It was about a year after my employment, I was tasked to solicit for a contractor to repair the roof of the administration building. Water was leaking into the financial record storage room due to concrete spalling on the roof. We secured the contractor, and on the first day of the project, the jackhammering was so unbearable, the noise level was not safe for port employees and tenants and customers to be exposed to. We asked the contractor to work at night. On 3 occasions during this project, heavy rain had been upon us and flooded the second floor of the administration building. On one of these occasions, the marketing office was secured because staff being off island. Approximately a week had gone by when the employees of the building started to smell a musky, moldy stench coming from the hallway that led to the marketing office. And there were pictures provided. When the marketing office was open, the entire office was covered in almost 2 inches of water. Port maintenance had to get rid of all the waterlogged furniture, the wet computer equipment. They ripped out the carpeting and retiled the entire office. Water had also leaked to the adjacent office that was being leased by a commercial tenant. This tenant also experienced extensive water damage to her filing system and computer systems. I believe this resulted in the tenant terminating her lease and eventually moving out. On another occasion, the water had flooded the entire second floor, and the water took a path directly on top of the main entrance door to the American President Line's entrance. The water was coming down in buckets. You would be literally drenched to try to get in and out of that office. Luckily, our port maintenance division was able to funnel the water and channel it outside the building. We talked about ADA compliance. The port has made improvements in our port administration building to accommodate individuals with physical challenges that need our services. However, we are still not 100% compliant. We have widened our wheelchair ramp to meet wheelchair specifications. We have installed an ADA compliant motorized door with the wall switch plate at the top of the wheelchair ramp. We have relocated all the ADA parking stalls to an area near the wheelchair ramp, and also installed an ADA curb access ramp at the base of the wheelchair ramp. Absent an elevator, this is about all we can do to this very, very old building. In another incident on Wednesday, September 6, 2016, it was the last day to submit proposals for the OSHA training and certification project for maritime terminal operations. If you're not aware, RFPs and IFB submittals are time sensitive and require a date and time stamp upon submittal. On this day, a former mayor was submitting a proposal and had to have one of our offices on the first floor call the procurement office on the second floor so we could go downstairs and attend to the mayor's submittal. I responded to the request, and upon approaching the mayor, in her exact words, she said, "Wow, this building's not ADA compliant." I was embarrassed, and I responded, "Yes," and said, "I am very sorry." The mayor was walking with the assistance of a walker and could not climb our stairs. With this being said, the grandfather clause that protects the Port Authority of Guam from any ADA violations does not do any justice to our customers, tenants who need our services. Before I close, I just want to share a personal experience I had. I had submitted my application and I was waiting for a call for an interview, and this is before I started working, and it was late May when I got the call, and they said, "Mr. Munya, your interview will be on June 2nd at 9 in the morning." So on June 1st, I got a haircut, got my clothes ready, and signed my shoes, only to wake up to the announcement on the radio that the port's human resources had been on fire. And I said, "Wow, is this a sign?" Anyway, I know that the port is not, the port was built without the electrical components of today in mind. Everything back then was done on ledgers. I don't have an electrical contracting degree. I've had the honor of working with Senator Tom Anna and trying to implement the Tropical Energy Code. So I do know a little bit about electrical. And, you know, I can honestly say that our building is not adequate. And the result of the fire investigation was an electrical fire. So with that being said, I humbly seek your support in passing Bill 15734. The people of Guam need this new building. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
Chairman, senators, and committee members. My name is Simon Pinaula. I am the superintendent of the stevedoring division at the Port Authority of Guam. I have been at the Port Authority for over 20 years. I'm here today asking in your support to support management and our staff that's been down at the port for over 10 years on these bond issues. I humbly ask again before closing, like I mentioned before, my briefing and testimony will be very brief and concise. All other critical infrastructure has been mentioned by our management team, so we humbly ask for your support on this bond issue. Thank you. Salamat po.
Thank you.
Hafiday, buenas and Hafiday, Speaker Benjamin Cruz and Vice Speaker Mr. Lai, Senator Castro, Senator Lee, Secretary Lee, Senator Torres, Senator Tomata, and Senator Espadon. It's an honor to be in front of you speaking. My name is Janice Flores, and I'm a vessel planner for Terminal Division at the Port Authority of Guam. I'm in support of Bill 157-34, Port Authority Guam Bond Initiative. As an employee for the Port Authority that is assigned to vessel operations and deal firsthand with cargo movements in and out of the port, I'd like to give this testimony on why I think the rehabilitation of the H. Wharf and access road is necessary to the growth and efficiency of the port. Currently, we have 3 operational docks. When a vessel with aggregate cargo arrives and the operation is, in most cases, will take up to 72 hours to complete, this limits our ability to handle and service our line vessels. And that's the cargo vessels. Remember, everything starts at the port. So that's very important. That leaves us with only 2 docks to service line vessels with containerized cargo. The hotel wharf, the H Wharf, will enable us to handle all ro-ros, break bulks, aggregate operations that does not require gantry operations. So we can actually take those vessels and put them aside, and they can take as long as they want. And it will not in any way delay the containerized cargo into the port. So we now won't have Matson and APL fighting who's going to come in first and speed up their knots to get into the port so that they don't have any delays. Without entering our ability to service the containerized vessel operation with our other docks, I believe this will really benefit the port, and we will be saving lots of time from the efficiency and to greatly increase productivity. That is so vital. It hurts to go to an operation meeting and we have the agencies in front of us saying, no, I'm coming in Tuesday. No, me too. No, me too. Hey, if we get 3 berthing docks, we can service 3. And in some cases, some of the vessels they are self-sustained. So when the 3 docks are being utilized and there's no aggregate vessel or no ro-ro vessel on the H Wharf, we can send that vessel because it has its own gantry, its own ship's care to discharge their containers. So again, that speeds the process. I believe the quicker we get the cargo out to the community, the happier our customers will be. And again, the island doesn't move without the port. And lastly, before I close, just looking at the testimony, okay, so the cargo is important. Well, just looking at what I saw today is the safety. The administrative building, I wasn't really supposed to look at that, but look at this, look at the building. Look at the warehouse. We need to protect our cargoes from when our customers rely on us protecting their cargoes from the elements. We can't do it without a warehouse. And we certainly can't do it with a warehouse that's crumbling concrete on the roof. So hard hats are required when we go into that dock, but how? Okay, it falls on my shoulder. Now you're gonna tell me to fully suit like a football player to walk into that warehouse to entertain our cargoes and get our customers happy. So please, I'm asking you to please approve this bond. It's for the better of the people of Guam. Thank you. You all can clap now. Jeez.
Chief Roberto.
How do you follow that up? Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, Your Chairman, Honorable Senators, I am Christopher Roberto. I'm coming to you as from the police perspective, and partially from the former acting harbor master perspective. So, testimony that I provide you is not all encompassing, but it kind of gives you an idea of where it is that we stand from our lane. I believe that it's a big problem down there from the police perspective. And I want to start with the water line. That water line, when I figured out that it was such a huge thing, I literally called all the players in to try to figure something out. I called the Guam Fire Department in to see how we can work around some of the issues. Those water lines are a mess. I had a problem with, I had to go out to the ships, talk to their captains, their chief engineers as the acting harbor master, to kind of give them a little bit of insight without telling them the story that, hey, we have no fire suppression capabilities. Oh, and by the way, these fittings don't fit up against your ship. So if we took our mobile fire pumps and we started them up, little did I know, we could have sunk their ships with the sheer volume that our pumps put out. These are no small pumps. And so the workaround to it was, it's in place, we have a plan, we have a way to help fight the fires if there's anything dockside or landside. But why? We can take what we have, repair it, replace it, rebuild it, and provide the service to these ships when they come in, to include the dockside. So that's just the water line. The other part of it to that water line is, when I was told that the water pressures that came in could not support fire suppression, I said, well, how can we do it? The folks, I'm told, said we have to shut down the village of Piri. So, Mr. Speaker, if your water line is low, don't call me because we're not trying to fight the fire, okay? So yeah, we definitely don't want to do that to get it to the requisite 90 PSI, just to fight. I'll transition on to Gulf Pier. That's a major connection for fuel. Fuel. You recall from the typhoons and the fires and stuff like that, just when the lightning struck the fuel tank, it was hard for us to get the fuel. Well, unbeknownst to a lot of the folks here, when I was with Special Operations, I actually dove that pier. And that's pretty scary being under there. And I look at, you've seen the pictures. I didn't even want to be under there. Now, when we take physics in the form of a 200 to 500 ton vessel bumping up against a man-made object with Mother Nature at its back, those fuel piers, that fuel pier and the dolphins have taken a beating. And so Castro, if you want to go dive, call me and I'll take you there. Warehouse 1 and the EQMR buildings. You've seen the photos. You know, I don't necessarily like wearing a hard hat inside a building, but my concern is that we have 2 police boats that we store under there. The replacement cost for those police boats are roughly $400,000. The electronics array that I have on those, or we have on those boats, are not easily replaced. Those items are our FLIR, the forward-looking infrared, our radar, our searchlights, our communication suite. When that goes through and is damaged, and I have to go to the boss, you know, to ask for replacements, it's kind of tough because those are brand new boats, brand new retrofitted boats. Hotel Wharf, I won't say much about it. Presentation earlier, as my colleagues and our leadership has pointed out, it needs some serious attention. But the other part, from the police perspective, is to have a geographically separate administration building. It just makes sense. From police perspective, I don't want to worry about where accountable the accountability of the personnel down at the Port of Guam. We already know in the yard, the blue-collar workers, they already know what it is that they need to do. We don't need to worry about the administrative people and what it is they're doing. I prefer to keep the security of the port whole. I prefer to keep all business from our lane, outside and away from the working machinery. And to me, it'd be great if it could be out there from our lane. So basically, in a nutshell, the stuff that I'm talking about is not all-encompassing, but from my lane, I hope that if you have any questions, that we can actually take you and show you the challenges that we have from down there, and the hard work that we've done to collaborate with the other agencies in order to make this thing happen or to function safely over the past has come to an end. It's time for us to fix it, and we ask your support. I ask your support on behalf of the hardworking men and women at the Port of Guam, and that you take their testimony to heart, because they're the ones who have been here. They're the ones who go to work every day. They're the ones who stand out there in the rain, and like my good friend here, Janice, I want to pull her into the patrol car when it's raining hard, but she's out there, she's jobbing it. And so, please, help us out. That's
Thank
all
you
I have.
very much, Steve. Sir?
Benezen Hafedim, Honorable Speaker, Senators, and stakeholders. My name is Paul Santos. I am the Environmental Compliance Specialist with the Port Authority of Guam. I'm here today to express the importance on why the request for the bond is needed for the improvement of the Go Pier, Hotel Wharf, and the port compound, and how the environment will be affected with these facilities. Recently, the Port Authority of Guam had a surprise inspection by U.S. EPA. The inspection consisted of the 1990 amendments to the Clean Water Act and the Guam Clean Water Standard promulgated under the code annotated. One of the main issues is the rainfall drainage system located on the Ikamara warehouse number 1. As you already know, the building structure was built in the late 60s. EPA regulations enforcement wasn't until the late 70s. Recently, canopies were erected to protect employees and equipment from the weather, but when it rains and where you stand, water runs all over you and under the equipment. The potential runoff from the warehouses pick up the contaminants from the ground and lead direct into the ocean, causing pollution. This is a major problem that has been identified by the US EPA. Our main lines is also another concern. Our water lines is probably over 40 years old. In order for us to maintain compliance with the regulators, the port's water line must hold a 90 psi, as they've been mentioned earlier. We are able to maintain that pressure, but as they mentioned earlier, it will be multiple breaks all over the yard. Go Pier, it's a vital role also within. It is able to hold vessel operations and passenger ships for receiving fuels. Go Pier is part of a 2 location of a fuel inlet receiving point. If you recall, one of the past typhoons, Guam experienced a fuel shortage. Go Pier was the only available pier to receive fuel at that present time. The other piers receiving locations sustained damages from the storm. Hotel Wharf is another vital location. It is known for the locations as we can do it in the early 80s. Believe it or not, operations that was out of the ordinary, dirty operations, or there's an operation that could not be performed in the port, it was taken down to Hotel Wharf. Imagine today's protocol, Hotel Wharf does not require half of the requirements of the entered facility under the Coast Guard, but it's one of the areas that the port needs up and running to its full capacity. This location will benefit commerce and ease the congestion within the Port Authority of Guam. Our administration building, it's old, it's grandfather old. Sometimes old teams respond back with problems. As you may know, the administration building went through the fire as mentioned, but luckily the port was able to rebuild and move back in. The facility does not meet the local and federal requirements and NFPA. The worst part is the sewage system in it. Days, months, and years pass and go, but the sewage system sometimes does not cooperate. Everything that I mentioned, everything that was identified on the screens, is what FEMA and Homeland Security call a critical infrastructure. The building and location plays a major role, and it's not a want, it's a need, meaning it is important to our island, our economy, and our future. Without the necessary upgrades, and the taxpayers will have to spend more money trying to keep up with the commerce. Northwest, the vulnerabilities, northwest to the port stores over 1 billion barrels of fuel. So it's a storage depot, which is IP&E, Mobil, and Shell. We call that the Cabras Island Fuel Farm location. Adjacent to them is Go Pier and Hotel Wharf. The supply to the southeast is our main power grid. And to the across the port is the fuel farms, military fuel farm, which supplies the DoD vessels. Apple Harbor also is the main body water for Big Row of Commerce. It's the only harbor that is available for all vessel operations. Upper Harbor houses the mangrove plantation, which is protected by the NOAA Fish and Wildlife Division, and our waterways are protected under the regulation by USCP and the United States Coast Guard. So imagine if we encounter a huge disaster. If the fire was to break out in the port would not be capable to fight the fire. That fire will transfer will cause a chain reaction, and it will transfer to our next door neighbors, which is a fuel depot. It can affect the power plants, and it can affect our piers, the receiving piers. Imagine if we had a petroleum spill at Go Pier because of a break in the infrastructure. The whole entire harbor will be closed off. Local government and federal businesses will be affected. This is what we call an environmental disaster. How would our government look if the entire Upper Harbor is closed down because of an upgrade to our critical infrastructure? Stores will be empty, sickly people will be more sick. And not to mention our island will be in a load shedding. In my closing remarks, everyone here today are here to protect the present and future of our critical infrastructure and protecting our employees' well-being. We are all here today to ensure the continued strong running government. To all you senators here today, in the best interest of our island, allow us to continue down the road to transform our facilities into the world-class terminals for Guam and for the Western Pacific region. Allow us to borrow from the bond market, be one of the individuals that makes our better future for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask those of you that are testifying to please provide your written testimony so that it makes it easier for transcription?
Okay.
Please.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, Vice Speaker, Senators in this committee. My name is Vince Akfaji from Maritzo. I've been employed at the Port Authority of Guam for 3 years now, so I'm a fairly new employee. I was prepared to read my 54 pages of testimony. However, with all that's been said already, I think I can shorten it. So I was in the back editing to just 1 page. So we'll break for lunch in time, I hope. The Port Authority of Guam is seeking this committee's support and approval to go on the bond market for capital improvement projects to improve the system. And the system as defined in all of this legal jargon that I'm not so familiar with. But it's defined in this document. Let me just read quick short definition. System is defined as means or works, property, and facilities now owned, operated, or leased by the authority, and used by and useful to the authority for providing a deep water commercial port known as the Jose de Leon Guerrero Commercial Port, as well as the civil port, small boat marinas, and all related facilities of Guam located on Cabras Island, Upper Harbor, Agana Boat Basin, and all other government of Guam small boat marinas comprising all harbor works and facilities, the authority, including all channels, waterways, basin seawalls, docks, piers, land areas, utilities, warehouses, cargo handling machinery and equipment, tugboats, barges, fireboats, and other works. Properties, structures, or other facilities in or upon or pertaining to the lands, improvements, and water of the authority used or useful for, or necessary for, or incidental to the development and operation of the City Leonguera Commercial Port, as well as the civil port, small boat marinas, and all related facilities of Guam based or located on Cabras Island Upper Harbor. Oh, that's a lot said in that definition, and I think it covers all that we're here asking for, and that's funding for our capital improvement. The mission of the Port Authority of Guam is to plan, coordinate, receive, store, distribute cargo in compliance of Port Authority of Guam's policies and procedures, and in compliance with local, state, federal regulations, and to perform this mission under the safest conditions, protecting our employees, equipment, facilities, property, and preserving the environment. Again, it all justifies our request for this bill to be passed. Two things that I want to talk about is the warehouses. To execute the mission of the Port Authority of Guam, we need a large amount of logistical and personnel support. And most of these personnel are housed in these two warehouses, Warehouse 1 and the EQMR. We're talking about mechanics, crane mechanics, heavy equipment, light equipment, forklifts. We have painters, welders, people in preventive maintenance, the engineering division, the safety division. We have tenants, fisheries, and other tenants housed in these warehouses. And as testimonies provided earlier, it's a risk. It's an everyday risk for our employees and equipment to be in these facilities. We do have an active group of employees that go around and knock down these spouting, loose spouting, before it falls on us or equipment. But in doing so, we further expose those rebars to oxidation and rust, adding to more spouting and more chipping. Before we know, we only have rebars left in those warehouses. We're not careful. Importante na dia, gosi importante na desisyon. Para hamzu, pareho zan para hami, empleado gi autoridad peta. Ugagogo supportun mizu, ugagogo na preba if naisin mommy, already in gagagaw. Naayam ni fetsa. Not fun safuham. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, Vice Speaker, and Senators. My name is Ryan Arreola, and I am fairly new to the port, being only here for around a month. I am the new commercial specialist, and I'm here to testify in favor of Bill 157-34. Prior to this, I was in the Bay Area, and I was working for a property management and development firm, so I'm fairly familiar with buildings and how all that works. I'm very excited to be back in the government of Guam and here to serve my island of Guam. I want to come here with fresh eyes to the port, innovation, and what the future should be for this agency. First off, when I enter the port, I notice there are many safety concerns, and it starts with the rusty stairs leading to my office. In this office, you have a lot of the general public walking in there, excited with their kids to get their fishing permits, leases, to rent boats, boat spaces. All it takes is for someone to fall through those rusty stairs, and it's done. Again, this is the only port on island. making it a very important and critical and necessary business for our island. Should the port fail, the island falls with it. Speaking on the buildings, there's only so much maintenance a building can handle, and especially with this building, given its location, the building could deteriorate a lot faster than others, especially in the state that it is currently in. With new construction, innovation, methods, and materials today, we can have a longer lasting and stronger building to conduct this type of business. And again, with a stronger building, we can provide a foundation to increase our revenues. And what I mean is, if we have the necessary equipment and buildings, we can actually provide more leases and generate more money. For example, Matson. We have Matson right down the street here in Anigua. They should be at the port. For people who bring in cars, they have to go to the port to drive to Matson to drive back to the port. They should be there at the port. They're one of our larger tenants. However, we don't have the infrastructure to support them. Our bottom line, too, is we need to have a safe place to work every day. We walk around looking at all the safety concerns and, watch this, watch that. When I was being introduced to the facilities, I had to watch my step everywhere I went. And again, it started with just walking into my office every day. Again, I'm proud to be back in Guam. I'm proud to be at the port, and I would like to be proud to show people where I work and have a better, safe condition to work in. I look forward to taking the port to the next level as to where it should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I guess we'll segue into the commercial tenants. Either one of you.
Mr. Chairman, Senators, Hafaday. My name is John Selleck. I'm Director of Strategic Development for APL. And want to come and lend our support for this bill and for the bond measure. There's considerable congestion at the terminal facilities, at the container facilities at the Port of Guam. And it's affected our operation and affected our customers, the business people throughout Guam. This is exacerbated times when there's a passenger vessel, a cruise vessel in port, or a ro-ro vessel. There was one time we made it to Pilot Station early Thursday morning. A passenger vessel was going to be coming in later on that day. The prior vessel that was on dock was late in leaving, and so we were not able to come in. We ended up deciding, rather than wait 2 days just outside the harbor, we went to Saipan left Guam, went to Saipan to deliver Saipan freight, came back to Guam Saturday. Of course, our many customers who were shipping from Guam to Saipan, their freight, we had to leave, much of which we had to air freight to Saipan to make up the difference for ice cream and beer. So by relocating the roll-on, roll-off vessels and the passenger vessels over to Hotel Wharf, it'll help alleviate some of that congestion at the commercial port under the gantry cranes, which will help not only ourselves, but of course all of our customers. In support of as a tenant in the administration building, we can attest that yes, we did have a waterfall in our office right out at the entrance to our door, which was alarming because we're on the first floor of a second-story building, and the water was brown, so we're closer to the restrooms than we are to the roof, so we weren't sure of the source. So not that we're complaining, the opening in the office was actually that we were able to move in. It's the old APL office became the Matson office, and then after the fire became the APL office again. Was much better than we were at United Fisheries in old fishery warehouse was our prior office. So it was an upgrade, but still we can attest that there is a shortage of office space in the administration building today for commercial tenants. So going further, the fact that there is this Tiger grant that has been won is a great accomplishment. In the maritime industry, I know that Guam has been applying for Tiger grants for a number of years, and this has been a great success to be awarded a Tiger grant for Hotel Wharf. And I think it's an opportunity that Guam should take advantage of. And then lastly, I'd like to just say that, you know, having the passengers over at Hotel Wharf potentially can lead to, you know, growth in that industry, which I think is an opportunity for Guam and for the region. And that concludes my remarks.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, Senators. My name is Raymond Cruz. I'm actually the Operations Assistant General Manager for American President Lines. We've had some challenges. This is going to be our third year on island, and again, echoing what my coworker here, John, has mentioned, the Hotel Wharf really is a benefit for the carriers that are carrying cargo into Guam. And reason for that is that, again, it doesn't impact our ability to have birthing so that Antitita can get her oil, right, to make her guzuria and stuff. So freeing that up and having us or any other vessel come in, we can actually make it on time to the next port. Anytime we encounter delays here on Guam or any other ports, it costs us a lot of fuel and manpower to get to the next port and get right back to Guam. So that was one of the things that we would like to kind of, kind of join with the Port Authority and their endeavor on this bond. The other one is, of course, the administration building. The building that we're in now, we are tenants. We're leasing that. There's a lot of uneven flooring. There's some trip hazards in there. I mean, I've ran into them a couple of times. The port has been very supportive and actually kind of leveled out some of the areas, but there's still a lot of potential for trips and also some electrical hazards in our current office. So we're addressing that with the port. So the new office or the new administration building would be a benefit for us. We're looking at long-term lease. We're going to continue to be down at the Port Authority. So if the administration building is awarded or the bond goes through, we would be tenants for that facility as well. We're also concerned about the water line within the port compound. Should that break or bust, we have employees. There's 18 of us in our current office, plus the Port Authority themselves. Some women are very sensitive to using porta potties. It becomes a health hazard for some. So that's another concern that we have as tenants of the Port Authority of Guam. The Gulf Pier, we do occasionally fuel, and we do berth our vessel there once in a while. An impact again of not getting fuel. We might have to go to Saipan or Busan, Korea, to get fuel. So again, the upgrade of the Gulf Pier or the mobile pier would be important to not just American President Lines, but for other companies as well that do take on fuel. And again, we're here today in support of the port's endeavor for this bond, and thank you for having us here.
Thank you. Mr. Leon Guerrero.
Good morning, Senators. My name is Ken Leon Guerrero with Guam Citizens for Public Accountability. And although we agree with everything that was proposed under Bill 157 is badly needed for the port, what we disagree with is the timing of this bill. Because with the current litigation in the Guam Supreme Court, it looks to us like this bill is a shortcut funding mechanism to ensure that Guam YTK gets their money. Because when you look at the language of this bill, starting on page 26, line 7, authorizes using bond proceeds to pay for any prior obligations of the authority for any purposes authorized by law. And I submit the fact that an outstanding judgment blessed by the Supreme Court of Guam would constitute an outstanding obligation authorized by law.
And the fact that this has been going on for nearly 3 years, and the 33rd and so far the 34th haven't done anything to prepare the island financially for the possibility of this catastrophic financial hit is a big concern. Because now we're going to issue a bond, which we agree with, should be done at some point in time, but not until the legal case has been finished, because we think that putting $80 million in the checking accounts of Guam, Port Authority of Guam, is going to make it even more irresistible to Guam YTK and their legal team. So we prefer waiting until such time, or until this body takes actions to prepare a sinking fund for this situation, because in the 2 years that this has been bouncing around in the courts, we've accumulated nearly $3 million more in interest. So now the award is knocking on $18 million. And in a year, it will be 19.5. And still, we don't have any contingency from this body other than issue bonds to the port, and then we're going to take $20 million out of those bonds to pay the settlement. So the net result is all the citizens of Guam will be paying more for all their products through no action of their own, and the port, because we were forced to divert $20 million, isn't going to be able to make the repairs and requirements and investments that this bill is targeted for, are going to have to fall back on the general fund. And there's language in this bill where the government of Guam guarantees the payment of the bills. So now we're back into general obligation bond status. So the biggest concern we have about this is that there has been no effort to prepare for the award, because the people of Guam have no faith in the court system after looking at the decisions that the court has come out with. So what we would have liked to have seen 2 years ago was maybe the possibility that this body would have doubled or tripled the sin tax on cigarettes and alcohol, because a doubling or tripling of the sin tax would raise the funds necessary and impact the fewest number of citizens, because a dramatic increase in the tariff is going to affect everybody. A general obligation bond is going to affect everybody. Whereas if we double or triple the sin taxes, we affect a smaller number of people, because eventually at some point in time, based on the way the legal cases have been going, it is clear that Guam YTK is going to have their pound of flesh. The question is, where does that pound of flesh come from? And we prefer that this body take action to set up some type of a fund that affects the minimal number of people, because we can't rely on our court system. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you very much. Senator Brown, why don't we invite your team back up so that the senators can ask their questions at this point? Oh, were you going to do a separate one? Okay.
John Santos, Operations Manager. The committee, I've worked for the port 30 years, so I'm going to give an operations spin on 2 of the projects. I'm also the secretary of the executive committee for the Association of Terminal Operators, Stevedoring and Shipping Companies of Micronesia. It's a 50-year-old association, comprises of Guam, the CNMI, to include the island nations Palau, FSM, and the Marshall Islands. So we talk about the Port Authority of Guam. The Port Authority of Guam is not just a port. The Port of Guam is a transshipment port, very vital to all the island nations that surrounds us. We're also a strategic port in the eyes of the federal government. So I'm going to start off first and go with the administration building from an operations standpoint, but I don't know if they can pick it up on the screen. If you can turn to page 9 and just look at this and just bear with me. Turn to page 9 and look at this aerial picture. If you look where it says welding shop, EQMR, and the warehouse building, that is where the maintenance shop is at. Okay, it's like a V. Now look at the admin building, that whole fencing around it. If that place, just imagine that place was cleared. For the 30-odd years I've worked with the port has expanded almost twice. So as the port continues to expand, our maintenance footprint has not expanded. Okay? We went from, as our volume started to rise, we changed out equipments. Not your, from a 10-ton, we changed out to side lifters. Now we're up to top picks. We have a fleet of tractors. What's not showing on any of the presentation is where all these equipment. We've expanded with the DOD money, funding for our break bulk area. All of these equipment are currently staged within where the cargo area, which should not be. So as we expand for capacity, we have yet to expand for the capacity for the shops. When we expanded the yard, we moved the crane mechanic. Now the crane mechanics moved into the old feed mill, for those that can remember the feed mill down at F6. When we expanded, we moved the feed mill out. We gave additional capacity for the yard. We moved the crane the crane mechanics over to warehouse number 1. This whole area needs to expand in order for the equipment to be moved over. We don't like to see our equipment mixed up together with cargo, especially during inspections, if there's a spill in the yard and stuff. So we knew, it's like strategic for operations, we really want the admin building to move out. The admin building itself, although it hasn't been mentioned, and I know one of our tenants is here is APL, the admin building is a one-stop and is favored by a lot of the customers that come to Guam that ship regularly, whether in Micronesia or in the mainland. It's a one-stop. You have port entry, you have customs, and you have the carriers. You try and go to any other jurisdiction, you have to drive around to get to that place. So that's the beauty of it. The challenge is that the footprint for all of our customers, and though I may not be there on the commercial side, but I meet with them regularly, they want to expand too. Customs wants to expand, the carriers want to expand, but we try and make piecemeals where they're at right now. But they do want to expand, okay? For operations, when this building, not later now, moves out, it'll give us those additional capacity for the maintenance, and in turn will benefit the operations. Hotel Wharf. Prior to 9/11, in my younger days, we used to stage ro-ro vessels there, aggregate vessels away from the main terminal. After 9/11, post 9/11, every port had to come out with what they call a vessel security plan. Hotel Wharf did not meet that. Didn't have the lightings, didn't have the fencing, so everything ceased over in that wharf. As much as we talk about F7 in the future for expansion, now that we have the grant on developing Hotel Wharf, it gives operation, it's an extension to our current wharf. We talk about passenger vessels. When a passenger vessel comes in, she gives notice almost 2 years in advance. We have what we call our regular liner service, which we don't want to disrupt. These are vessels that chase each other in a rotation. So when a passenger vessel comes in, all these liners, the weekly and the fortnightly, whoever is impacted, it pushes everybody to the right. Then we have to secure a portion of the yard, and we can't do operations because it's not a passenger terminal, okay? The ro-ro vessels, as I mentioned, is another one. When the ro-ro vessels comes in, though they may call themselves liner service, they come in every 45 days, month and a half. But they're pretty big and they take up a lot of space for the regular liner vessels. We have what we call project cargo. There's a lot of bids that have been put out by NAFAC. The most recent been a lot of awards. Those are project cargoes. Hotel Wharf, what it does for us, for the Port Authority of Guam, and even for operations, we're able to use Hotel Wharf so it does not impact our regular liner service. A prime example, we had a meeting on Monday. We have a project cargo coming in. This is all sheet piles, one whole vessel of sheet piles. This vessel that's bringing it in is a tramper, just comes offload. She has a connecting barge, the 7,000 barge. So this cargo is very, and I call it dirty because it's very dangerous. It's sheet piles, one whole vessel. It's not for Guam. It's transshipment for Kwajalein. We've been doing aggregate operations for Kwajalein, for Diego Garcia. So these are project cargoes. In my meeting, I told the agent, they were supposed to come in on a Friday this week. They want to come in on a Monday. I said, may not. So these are chartered vessels. We're going to have to wait now until probably the end of the week when there's an open window because I have my regular liner vessels. The liner vessels that come in, there's other vessels that connect with them throughout the week so they can reach out and service all the other island nations, not only Guam locally. And there's connections that they do need to meet. If I bring in next week, when there's an open window, I bring in this, both vessels, the aggregate, which will be in front of warehouse number 1, we'll be loading aggregate. At the same time, we'll be loading these sheet piles. And then when we start to work this vessel, if there's any liner service, should I allow them to come in, it will delay because I don't have the capacity. So that's the beauty of Hotel Wharf. At 500 feet, putting all the boards, probably going to have like 800 feet. It does not disrupt. With all the project cargoes that are coming in, my biggest concern in operations is that the type of cargoes that we're handling may damage our rails on the waterfront for our gantries, delays the shipments, and especially when you talk about Guam being out of nowhere. So when the goods come in, for every delay, whether it's weather for the vessel, whether it's waiting for a berth, whether it's in the yard, everything is all placed. The yard is a big pipe system. The water, it has to flow cargo. Any delay when you talk about shelf life, by the time it gets to the shelf, you decrease it, especially for the island nations. So project cargo, passenger vessels, Hotel Wharf, though they say it's going to be a multi-purpose, I call it a flip wharf. So I can do any type of operation that I need to down in that wharf. So it is very vital, not only for the operations, but servicing our local, our military, being a transshipment port, and being a strategic port. The port can show you all these pictures. There's a lot of good presentations. But at the end of the day, I do invite the senators, the committee, come out. I'll let you know when this one vessel is coming in. You can see the impacts, how slow. This is a one-shot, we call it tramper vessel. It's going to come in, it will delay our wharf. It's got 24/7. You can see how we do aggregate operation, and you see how vital Hotel Wharf will be. At the same time, you get to see our maintenance. Like I said, you look at that picture, it's the V's still there since the day I worked back in that's top secret, 85, right, 85. So we've expanded for cargo. It's about time that, when I heard, I've been asking for many years that the admin building should go. Look at that footprint from the V together with the admin when we expand. It's not just to stage equipment. It needs to be staged, needs to be maintained away from cargo operation, away from cargo that has yet to be cleared by customs, away from cargo that needs to be loaded. So the admin building is strategically for me in operations. It's a blessing if she can move out. It just adds to our capacity in the yard. So if you go down to the yard and I invite you to come out, you can give me a call, you can give our office a call. You can see where we stage all this equipment. You can see our challenges. The credit and the most valuable asset that we have at the port is our employees. So the water lines, it's an impediment when it breaks in the yard. The admin building's another impediment because for me it's an impediment because we have to store all these equipments in the yard. The guys seem to turn these vessels around in a timely manner. Hotel Wharf, H Wharf, sorry, Senator, H Wharf, admin, water lines, they're all vital, especially Gulf Pier. Anything that happens, any type of spill, we're out training house walker. But at the end of the day, we try to not disrupt commerce. So in closing, I do invite the senators, and I am in support of Bill 157-34. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, Senator, you want to bring your team back up, and we'll allow the oversight chair to have the first set of questions.
Good morning again, everyone, and Senator Brown, and to your management team, and Mr. Santos, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for all your testimony this morning, as well as everyone who participated in the presentation. I wanted to just highlight the cost breakdown, because I was under the impression that that was going to be provided on the screen. But just so that those who are watching this particular discussion, just to highlight the costs associated with all the different areas that have been discussed with the allocation of some of the proceeds. The Hotel Wharf and Access Road would, out of the anticipated bond proceeds, it would absorb about $14.2 million. The replacement of the administration building and the commercial center will be approximately $17.5 million. Let me go back to the Hotel Wharf, because there was a Tiger grant that was acquired and successfully approved of about $10 million, so that's the matching requirement. Replacement and relocation of the water lines, the screen is up top, is approximately $6 million. The repair of the equipment and the maintenance and the warehouse one buildings, $2 million. The Gulf Pier repairs, approximately $2 million. And then you have the next sheet, which shows the anticipated loans that could be refinanced. And I know that it was mentioned that there must be at least a 2% variance in terms of any of these particular loans being able to be refinanced as part of the proposed authorization. A couple of questions, and then I'd like to open it up to Mr. Speaker, allow our colleagues to be able to also ask their questions, so I'm not going to delve too much into this. But the first issue is, with regards to stakeholders, I know that my office has been visited by a number of stakeholders that utilize the services at the Port Authority. One of the biggest concerns that they have, and I just want you to share what your plans are in terms of addressing this, the replacement of the cranes, because I noticed that part of your funding request is not inclusive of procuring or replacing any of the cranes that are presently operational. So, Madam Senator, if I can ask you please to provide a response on that.
Thank you very much, Senator Argan. To respond to that issue, as you know, it was a couple of years ago that we actually retired Gantry 3. And there's been tremendous interest. Of course, we still have the remaining Polar cranes that were purchased in 2012 that are in operation, but there is interest in wanting to know how is the port going to address the replacement of Gantry 3 so that we do have additional capacity and crane capacity in the event we have to do maintenance, which again is a requirement when gantry cranes have to be taken down, engines have to be refurbished, body work because of ongoing corrosion needs to be addressed. So collectively, we've come to the concurrence that there definitely is a need to replace Gantry 3. We did debate and deliberate, and I know Alfred can elaborate further on this, but because we do have a separate account fund that was created to put reserve funding that is collected with regards to the cranes, we believe there's close to about $5, I know Joanne's in here, at $6 million around, give or take. I mean, you have the exact figure of funds that have since been collected to address the replacement of cranes. So we have discussed that. We discussed that with the consultants, and their approach was to look at a separate separate mechanism to address the funding of the replacement crane. But we do desire, probably within the next year or so, to move forward with the procurement of a new gantry crane so that we do have that additional capacity, because there are days the need is there. If one of the gantry cranes go down, and in some cases when we have to service our bigger carriers such as Matson, we're actually using all 3 cranes when possible to unload cargo or transship cargo, because you know, their main vessel's the mother vessel coming in, and they have their transshipment vessel that's going out to the region. So we're unloading and taking down and reloading that same cargo on the transshipment vessel. So that is something that we do consider a priority. It was just recommended at the end of the day in terms of the funding mechanisms for these specific projects. And by all means, this does not limit the need for upgrades and improvements at the port. What you're looking at is the most critical list. This is not the end of the list, because I know that everyone in the key divisions will have a much longer list than what we've even provided here. You know, when you look at infrastructure that's now coming upon 50 years old, and in most cases, as elaborated, has never been repaired. In some cases, the warehouses have never been repaired. You know, it's an unfortunate situation that's catching up with us. And if we don't address what we see as major infrastructure issues at this time, the situation is going to get worse, and the liability of the port is going to get worse. So this by no means limits the list of issues that the port would like to see. We would see these as the most critical and probably the higher price tag items that we're putting forth to finance in a way that we can actually afford to pay back for the bond proceeds, certainly should you approve this bond, that we can manage at this time. So that's one of the reasons these projects are listed here. Another reason why we have a separate funding source and mechanism that we'd like to replace Gantry 3 on. I know Alfred can elaborate on this particular issue.
Thank you very much, Senator. Alfred?
Yes, sir. On the replacement of Gantry 3, the Port Authority, Slater Nakamura, which is the consultant for PUC, and WSP, which is our consultant, did an analysis of the cash flow arriving from the surcharge for the crane replacement. And in their analysis of the surcharge, there is sufficient revenues to be generated that would address the purchase of a new gantry crane. The formula for it would be taking the $5 million that we have in the sinking fund right now and match it with whatever bond is needed to complete the purchase to replace Gantry 3. And that in itself would be a separate bond with the repayment coming from the crane surcharge. In the meantime, there would be sufficient revenues from the sinking fund available to start accruing to be placed towards the replacement of the polar cranes, so that when it comes time to replace the polar cranes, there would be cash available to be used, whether it be for a down payment type, and the rest of it would be financed through a bond to be supported by the crane surcharge. Slater Nakamura, WSP, and the port use the same analysis of the throughput to substantiate the payability and the fund balance of the sinking fund.
Okay, I just wanted to ensure that the stakeholders understood that within 2 years, 2 to 3 years, that you're working on procuring an additional crane to be able to offset or to replace any of your existing cranes, Gantry 3 in this case. The other question that I would have is, I know you mentioned with regards to the finance market, a possible rating of BBB minus, and everything is subject to submission of all the documentations and whatnot. The proposal authorizes a maximum interest rate of 7%. And in the recent year and a half, we have entertained, we in terms of the legislative body has entertained bond borrowing at a maximum cap, I believe, of about 6%. Would there be any issues with regards to looking at setting that cap at that particular level, or would you continue to recommend that, in fact, the upper echelon maximum rate of 7% be retained in the proposal, please?
Some of the issues that you look at in terms of setting the rate for a bond proposal is the current climate at the time. Now, One of the factors that would influence, or that does influence, the rate that the Port Authority would be pegged at is what is our experience in the credit market. The fact that we did secure a Tiger grant, and we have had experience with direct grants from USDA and loans guaranteed by USDA. The investors who invest in port bonds look highly on those operations because they attest to the fact of the port's ability to have their finances, to have their reports, and to have the personnel available to meet the terms and conditions of those grants and loans. So they anticipate that that relationship would give us an advantage to lower the rate. Another advantage would be our ability to have a sinking fund, a capital reserve account, to have money to finance up to three months of operation. That's another thing that investors look at in terms of the liquidity of the organization. What you would all have to bear in mind is that we will not be, our effective rate at the date of offering would probably be pegged a couple of notches below the general obligation rating of the island of Guam. And that's a new thing that was started this year. So no matter how good we are and everything else, we would be pegged at a notch or two below the general obligation rate.
So would you have any major concerns with regards to capping that at 6% rather than 7%?
At the moment, I don't see any problem on that.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Duenas, and thank you, Senator, and to all the management team. And Mr. Chairman, Chairman Santos, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What is the maximum amount that you're planning on borrowing?
The maximum amount that we foresee ongoing would probably be anywhere from 62 to 66 million. And that depends on what the payoff is on the 3 loans that we would be paying off.
Did I hear 80 being talked about today?
80 from the very, very, very beginning was the ceiling that we thought between our consultants and the bond people would probably be the maximum that the port would be able to afford based on its cash flow.
The reason why I pose that is because the difference I thought was going to be the replacement of the cranes, because as everybody has had to suffer me for the last 10 years, the cranes have been the one thing that I have been most critical about. But in the presentation that you gave us, it stops at 65, and if it goes to 80, it's coincidentally the same amount that Mr. Leon Guerrero is concerned about with the YTK settlement. And it's not clear in here that it is going to be used for cranes if you're going to take it to the 80,
yeah.
Or is that difference is going to be used for the YTK settlement?
No, the Order 1701 is very, very specific. In the event that the court rules that the Port Authority of Guam has to pay whatever the amount is for the settlement, that at that point in time we will approach PUC and report the findings to PUC. And the objective to that is come up with some kind of a resolution on how to address whatever the dollar amount is, whether it's cutting down on CIPs, whether it's amortizing it out on a payout.
Let me respond to this. You know, I understand there's going to be a lot of intrigue with regards to this issue, and Mr. Leon-Guerrero may be one of those who might think that the intent, I have no interest as a general manager at the Port Authority of Guam of coming before the legislature to ask for bond financing to address YTK. We've publicly taken no stand with regards to that issue. I understand it's now before the Supreme Court, but our management team's been very clear. We've taken no initiative whatsoever in any way to accommodate what we think is an actual ripoff. And I've said that word before, I will say it again, to the Port of Guam and to the ratepayers. So there is no intent whatsoever. Also, our bondholders, certainly, should this process move forward, would be very interested in how all bond proceeds are being expended. And they are, as we are with other bonds, are going to want to ensure that that money is used for what is intended. And that is our very focus. I mean, while I understand it's an ongoing case, this case started back in the early, 2001, many, many years ago, and we're having to battle with it. There's no accommodation whatsoever on behalf of our administration at the port to even address YTK. I mean, should that time occur, and as Mr. Duenas elaborated, as that issue is brought before the PUC, then that will be the appropriate time that that issue goes back to the drawing board. But we have no inclination whatsoever to pay or accommodate that particular action.
I'm glad that's clear, but it just, with the presentation, stopping at 65, the difference was coincidental. And it would have made me happier if that was clear that the 15 difference to the 80 was going to be for cranes, because you've all had to suffer me because of the fact that I want new cranes.
Right, and I understand, again, Mr. Speaker, I know your issues concerning the cranes have been there for a number of years, and understandable. I think at the end of the day, if we don't have the operating cranes there, we can't do business, so to speak. So we do recognize that. It is in our list. We did discuss that as well with Senator Uggan. The only reason it's not included in this particular bond venture specifically right now is the funding source. So that was brought up to us in terms of how we're addressing the payback for these identified projects, and then also because of the crane surcharge account that they recommended we pursue that on a separate lane, because that can be the mechanism for the payback of that particular loan.
And how much exactly is in the surcharge account?
Joanne would have that exact figure. I mean, it's between a little over $5 million. I know less than $6 million at this point, but we can provide you the account to date for the month of September. What is in that account?
Because I thought Al said 500.
No, million. And we're guesstimating, again, we're not going to know as with these projects until we actually bid them out and go to market. What the current cost is, but we've done preliminary review, and that can cost us up to $11 or $12 million to purchase a new gantry crane.
Well,
just for one gantry crane.
I understand that, because that was the reason why I was told we weren't going to get new ones.
Sure.
And so I was hoping that that amount, that $15 million, was going to be for new crane. I will now pass
I'm sorry.
have the questions answered by, posed by Senator Abbott, who has suffered me for 10 years in my push for...
Prior to doing so, can I just offer a quick inject? This particular legislation does have a certain provision that actually identifies the use of proceeds above and beyond what's currently identified. And it's very clear. It's only for capital improvement projects. There ain't no using this to pay no bond. Neither will our partners at the PUC allow us to do so. I just wanted to make that statement.
It also states that you're going to use it to pay off some outstanding obligations. And that's not Cap I, all right? I mean capital improvements.
Understood.
So he has some basis that his intrigue, all right? So I was hoping we could get some clarification and something in writing in this bill that makes it clear it's not, all right? And so Chairman Atta, thank you for suffering from me for more than a decade. You now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to compliment the port for an excellent presentation. I think the PowerPoints were real good, and the presentations themselves were certainly real good. I will state for the record that I will support the bill, and also do support the tariff increase that has been put before the PUC. And so with that, as I was reviewing the bill, of course, it begged the question of, so how is the bond going to be paid for? And it's going to be paid for from the port's revenues. But then you go back to the PUC consultant's analysis by Slater Nakamura in their submittal of the docket 17-01 dated March 7, 2017. And I don't know, I didn't quite catch what the chairman brought up earlier, Mr. Duenas, when you were bringing up some figures. But according to the PUC's consultant, they anticipate that the capital projects to be funded comes up to about $45 million. The outstanding loans to be refunded comes up to about $20 million. That's about $65 million. But they were also basing their computations on an assumed interest rate on the debt of 5.9%. And so if in fact the bill goes forward authorizing a 7% interest to allow then the port to go out and borrow upwards of 7%, then you're going to fall short of that. So I think we're going to need to reconcile Slater Nakamura's findings and basically what the bill is asking for. Now, I have some specific questions about, I think, I had a question too about the $80 million figure. I think we've kind of beat that one already. The Slater Nakamura in their report indicated that, and I quote what they said, the port continues to have deferred maintenance on critical equipment and infrastructure. And so whether it be the buildings or in particular the gantry cranes, does the port still utilize or does it utilize a performance management contractor which was called for under Public Law 31-145?
We currently have Matson on board that provides us that technical service with regards to our gantry cranes, and actually in the month of October, next month, we are going through another evaluation of their inspection of the work that has been done. We understand that concern, and that's one of the most basic things that we've tried to work on in terms of improving and enhancing our maintenance of our existing equipment, our new equipment that we've acquired, and most definitely the ongoing issues with regards to maintenance and repair of our gantry cranes. And I'm going to ask Mr. Cantaletta, who oversees our maintenance program, to relay to you what changes and improvements have been made since those concerns were raised.
But just to my basic question of, is the port using a PMC as was called for?
We did have a previous company on board. When the time came up for renewal of that contract, we were not satisfied. They were charging on average of $20,000 a week. And the quality, I think, and the technical expertise that they were providing to us was a bit problematic when we were the ones sometimes having to go out there and address those repairs. So when that contract came to an end, we did not renew it. We went out and did another bid. For this year, Matson did and was awarded that and does provide us the technical service with regards to our cranes in terms of the inspections, in terms of giving us recommendations of what we need to do to maintain the cranes. They will be coming back, as I mentioned, they're on board now. They'll be coming back next month to do an additional assessment of the work that has been performed since their last visit. And we are now in the process also of announcing a bid for a new performance management contract before the end of the year is up, I believe by November, so that we have a bridge from the conclusion of the Matson contract to bring up a new bid so that we can expand those services.
Okay, fine, thank you. Now, we have the $15 million YTK liability that's looming out there. Are there any other similar liabilities that's looming out there, like Cementon?
In terms of Cementon, I know we had a recent issue actually was brought up with the PUC in terms of their claiming charges that were, in terms of the wharfage that was being charged to them was inequitable in comparison to the other cement company. PUC did rule on that issue. There is a remaining 357, and Glenn, you can correct me if I'm down to the dollar here, in terms of deferred payment that Cementon had been granted by our board to allow them essentially to get in place and get operational, which did happen several years ago. So that amount is outstanding and still remaining. Of course, the port is going to be moving on requesting payment of that. I think we've extended significant amount of accommodation to Cementon. I think that time has come and gone. So certainly we're going to want to ensure that any monies that they owe to the port for rent, that they need to pay up on that. And that's certainly something the commercial division and our finance division will be pursuing.
Okay,
should they want to take action against us, I don't know. But at the end of the day, as we should expect, if money is owed to the port because they have been provided leased property, I'm not in the business of running a cement factory. Cementon was not built for the Port of Guam. They essentially leased the property to construct a cement facility and operate it. We have extended, certainly the time I came on board, extended our assistance to facilitate their construction of their pipeline on Gulf Pier, which are things their consultants should have addressed prior to even the building being constructed.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
So beyond that, I'm
much.
not aware of any action by Cementon, but certainly Port will be prepared to respond to any action that is taken against us.
Great, thank you very much.
So.
I guess the revenues that are generated by basically a lot of throughput, I guess the containers and whatnot, this makes up about 70% of the revenues that the port generates. Now, are the transshipped containers being charged for now?
Do you want to respond to that?
In the past, they were basically a free pickup, put down and pick up again, right?
No, with the new tariff proposal and everything else, they are being charged.
They're going to be charged?
They have been charged.
Okay, fine. Hotel Wharf. Will Hotel Wharf be equipped with ship to shore or shore to ship, whatever, crane, or is it just basically a dock and a...
Right now, what is in place now with regards to the Tiger funding and certainly the port share is to actually rehabilitate and restore the wharf to an operational status. That is not the case now. Occasionally we have small projects that happen there, or chassis parking, for example, in the interim. Because we actually, with the current structure, we are not able to transfer cargo at all from vessel to shore, from shore to vessel at Hotel Wharf. So we are not at this point including any type of crane activity. I do know that it's been discussed it would possibly cost us $2 to $3 million to get a mobile crane. Not the mobile hover crane. The mobile hover crane has become a very expensive white elephant, I guess. I don't even know why that thing was purchased. I understand I was told it was done as an interim crane to accommodate at the time when only gantry 1, 2, and 3 were in operation. That doesn't prevent that from happening in the future, but that currently is not funded in this particular proposal that's before the legislature.
Okay, fine. The admin building. I have no problem with spending money to build a new admin building. However, I do have some concerns with, in the PowerPoint, it said the design of the building will also meet the needs of the tenants. And I do have concern about the port competing with the private landlords out there and providing office space. Matson went ahead and went off-site to do their own place. So I do have concerns about that aspect of the admin building. Otherwise, I have no concerns about it. The water lines indicated that it's going to be, we're basically going to relocate it outside of the fence line.
Right.
What's the status of the fuel line that runs right down the middle?
The fuel line is still there. I think that is something I have relayed to the respective company that TriStar that currently does operate that fuel line, that in the future that is something I would like to see prioritized. We have discussed that among our management team. The potential dangers that exist for port operations are quite significant. During my time there, they have addressed repairs to that line. They've done wrapping to the pipeline to actually ensure that it's viable. However, I think we recognize that with any infrastructure such as fuel lines, the possibility is always there for potential leaks. If we ever had a major leak in the yard, that would significantly impact operations if we had to shut down or cordon off huge sections of the yard to accommodate, for example, repair work or cleanup or major excavation that would have to occur. And we have relayed that. I think very much it's something our board will formally probably also relay to TriStar. I understand there's hesitancy on their part because of the cost, but at the end of the day, because of the continued expansion of the port yard, and now that it's well within the footprint of the existing yard, it's in the collective interest and the priority of the Port of Guam to have that fuel line relocated outside of the yard to not, or at least to prevent any future impact to our operations as a result of a potential leak or major environmental issue that can occur,
Okay.
as well as liability on our property.
Fine, thank you. I do have a concern about the plan for the EQMR and the Warehouse 1 building. I mean, we're willing to spend $17 million for an admin building, but only give a $2 million facelift to each of these two buildings, which, according to the thing, houses critical equipment. So I am concerned about, just providing a facelift to a critical building. And quite frankly, if somebody stepped forward and says, well, fine, then we'll build a $17 million warehouse and have to increase the tariff, I'll get behind that too. But a $2 million facelift, I don't know how far that's going to take us. And I really hope that more consideration be given to those two buildings than just a $2 million facelift. Customs inspection building. Has Customs or Department of Agriculture approached the board at all, the port, to build a building so that, I guess they've always been talking about they need a building so that if they have to quarantine a container, they can take it in there, devan it, and whatever. Have they?
They have approached in terms of verbal discussion with regards to that issue. Any formal plans that has not been formally presented to port management or the board. I think we understand the need for that. But at the end of the day, that's something certainly Customs in their jurisdiction would have to bring forth. I mean, right now, we accommodate Customs. While they do charge for their fees at the port, every inspection that they do, they charge fees to port customers for that service and inspection as well. But they do not pay a single penny to the port in terms of their leased space, in terms of their power, their water bill. They pay a significant amount to the Guam Airport Authority, and for whatever reason, and we've been trying, I know Alfred has been trying within his division, in all fairness, that all of our tenants, so to speak, would contribute to that. But again, that is something Customs needs to formally approach us if they have other means of grant funding, or if they also can pursue financing to actually construct such a facility. I'm sure that's something we can sit down and talk about. I don't think it can be accommodated within our existing footprint of our yard, just because of the demands that we have there. Even now with the expanded yard that DOD helped us fund that was completed in 2015. If you go down there now, you already see that yard in full use with regards to container operations. So it would have to be at another location, but not located within the actual port yard just because of our ongoing demands. But we certainly welcome if Customs has any formal dialogue that they would like to engage with us. We're certainly willing to sit down and talk to them and see what can be worked out with regards to that issue.
Thank you. Gulf Pier. I guess that's one of the fuel docks. What's the status of F1?
F1 also has some repairs, but overall, we would look at Gulf Pier as the most critical. John or Sofran Alfred or Glenn, if you want to elaborate, there are still some repairs that need to be made at F1, but between the two piers right now, we look at Gulf Pier as the most critical. I anticipate if we have another major earthquake or two, considering the current status of the pilings at Gulf Pier, I think we could end up with an inoperable pier. And so while, again, this list does not compile all the demands at the port, there are other areas of various levels that also need to be repaired. But Gulf Pier, I will tell you, is right at the top of the list considering the current status of that facility.
And I'm sure that it is, but is there enough concern about F1 to, I mean, the question was asked about, you know, when you add up what's planned so far and the existing debt, it only goes up to 65, but we're asking for 80 million in the bill. And it's not clear what the other 15 million is for, but would there be enough concern on the part of the port to put F1 in there? Because if we only have one pier to unload the weekly shipment of fuel,
right,
we could be hurting.
No, we totally, and we don't rule that out, Senator. I know when the original $80 figure was put in, it was like the higher end, just depending as we led towards that whole process to ensure, depending on what the interest rate was. Because otherwise we'd have to come back. Even if you passed legislation and if we went out on the bond market and, you know, it was at this certain percent and this is what the end result would be in terms of debt service, we'd have to come back. So we certainly do need some wiggle room with regards to that. We're not objecting if F1, again, when we sat down and compiled this list, it was what are the most absolute critical needs. This doesn't, again, exhaust that list, but what is the absolute most critical needs in terms of this amount of money that we may have made available to us, would you prioritize on this list? Because this list actually was generated from the Port Authority, not, you know, the few of us sitting here saying, I like this project, let's do this project. So that's something that certainly can be looked at before this bill gets on the floor.
Does the port have a cost estimate for F1?
Do you have Senator, we are in negotiations with the tenant for F1 to repair it. We were in the process of finalizing it when an accident occurred. A vessel ran into the pier and caused some damages. So we're in the process of addressing those damages first to get it repaired. And then after that, we would initiate the maintenance and upkeep of
Is there a
F1.
ballpark figure to get the integrity of F1 to the level where it should be to be able to reliably pull ships up alongside? And you don't need to answer that now, but if you would please provide that.
It's approximately 2.4 million.
3.4 million. Okay, fine. I'm almost finished. I just got a couple more. In the PowerPoint, part of the proceeds is going to be used to refinance some of the existing loans. But it says possible refinancing. So why the uncertainty?
Because they have to meet the test of a savings of 2% or more.
2% or more, what do you mean? Like if you refinanced it, you're going to save 2% of the total amount you would have paid otherwise?
Right, that's the minimum amount.
Okay.
So preliminarily, 3 loans have met the test, and 1 did not. So we're going to refinance 3 of the loans.
All right. Finally, my last question. In the bill, there's a section 10234, and the title of it is Use of Balances of Funds and Surplus Money in the Funds. And the way I read that is that I guess if we finish one project and there's a balance, let's say we estimated $6 million and we finished it for 5, that then that money is available for the board to use for other system-related procurement. And the only concern that I have no problem with that, I've seen where basically then after a project was finished, sometimes another project may have been underestimated. So the question that I would have with that particular section is that it is not tight enough about the timing of when we can dip into the balance. And so that's the only other concern that I really would have on the bill, at least at this point, given the readings that I've had. So thank you very much, and that was a very good presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Did you have any other questions, Senator? You have your light on. Oh. I just remember there were times when you were chairing oversight over the port that I was able to get you to almost lose your composure with my excessive questioning, so I wanted to acknowledge that and let you be the first one to ask the questions today. And the chairman that served before you, Senator Espaldon, do you have any questions that you wish to?
Just real briefly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the senator to my right definitely asked most of the questions that I was going to ask. I do, however, I wanted to go back to the refinancing of the existing loans, the possibility of that. And I see from the back there are kind of three loans out there. One's with Bank of Guam, one's with ANZ, and the other one is a USDA loan. And of course, the answer is, those would be paid back contingent upon what the interest rates would be, and whether that would have at least a 2% savings. But I'm not sure I saw that in the bill, that the 2% savings was one of the requirements within the bill. Is that a self-imposed 2% as part of your presentation?
I think that's part of the legislature's rules.
Fair enough. We'll go down after that. But let me just ask a more direct question. On those loans, let's take them one by one. On the ANZ loan, the date of that was in December 2012. What is the maturity date of that loan? That was for $12 million.
The ANZ loan, I believe, is a 15-year maturity.
15 years, and at what interest rate was that taken out on?
From 2012, 2027.
No, I'm sorry, the interest? The
interest rate is 5.94.
5.94. All right. And then the Bank of Guam, same question. When is the maturity date?
That's a 10-year loan.
10 years. And the interest?
Interest is 4.14.
4.14, okay. And then, of course, the Department of Agriculture loan is a recent loan. What's the maturity date on that?
Okay, that's 15 years and a 6.18.
Really? That's the highest interest loan is from the Department of Agriculture? I was assuming that was going to be the lowest one. That seems like that's worthy of paying off. All right. Well, I mean, and it's interesting because if you're saying that, and the question was asked by the author of the bill, what would be the possibility of taking a look at reducing the 7% interest that's allowed in this bill down to 6%? It would be more in conformance. Actually, it would even be, hopefully you'd be able to get lower than 6%, but it would be more in conformance with what you owe ANZ at 5.94%. And definitely much higher than Bank of Guam's 4.14. So even the payoff on that, it would be questionable. So if you went for, and the reason why I asked that question, because when you talk about that $65 million figure, what you would possibly be going to the bond market for, $24 million of that is to really take a look at paying off these loans. But if they're at a lower interest rates, really the only thing that you would be looking at based upon the CIP projects would be $41 million at this point. And I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page on that one. And that's, I'm pretty much on point on that one. Is that correct?
And certainly, Senator, I mean, we're going to want to get the best rate that we can. I mean,
Sure.
We're not going to want to pay any more than we need to for either the new projects, not new projects, but the priority projects that are listed here.
Right.
And certainly in terms of looking, what is the financial benefit of refinancing the existing loans? Is there enough of a benefit to make it worth our while? We don't want to do it and end up paying more.
Right.
So we understand that's a legitimate concern.
Right, and so it may not even be up to $65 million in terms of the bond borrowing at the first go-round at least, right? What this bill is authorizing is up to $80 million, and that's not exclusive to just the projects that we've talked about today. I think going forward, it's basically expanding the port's ability to borrow for other projects that you even mentioned, Madam Senator, that are not even included on this list,
Right.
but are still necessary ultimately to the port.
And ultimately, to the degree that we can afford to pay. I mean, the list is longer, but certainly we want to do it in a way that's responsible, that we can ensure we have the ability to pay it back.
Right, and let me ask you this then. If we were to go to the bond market at $65 million, which is kind of the general, and I really think it's going to be lower now that we know the maturity dates of these loans and the interest rates of these loans out there. In terms of the 5-year tariff, well, no, let me rephrase that. If we would go for 65, what would be the anticipated, let's take it even at a 6, annual payment on something like that? Has that been considered at least? Has there been kind of a breakdown at the various interest rates and the various scenarios?
Yes, it has been. If we go for example, a 60 million, we're looking at a repayment of approximately $5 million.
$5 million a year over 30 years?
Yeah.
Okay, good enough. And the follow-up question then, and if we're talking $5 million a year, the follow-up question is the tariff, the 5-year tariff plan that we have in place. I mean, again, it was stated that it was basically implemented to help fund priority projects and to pay debt service of the port's current loans and future bond financing. I just need to ask, over the 5 years, how much does the port anticipate to take in based upon these tariff increases? I guess how much extra?
Well, based on the report that we have prepared, which I will be submitting to you and the rest of the committee, we are looking at the cumulative cash flow at the end of 5 years of 9.3 million.
9.3, but then once the 5 year is reached, what happens? Then the tariff, then there is no more increases and to the tariffs, and it'll stay at that level? Is that?
It would.
I mean, that's the anticipation, right?
Yeah. Yes. That would be the full 771.
So in other words, it won't go back down to where it was. I
No.
mean, the tariff increase was implemented, and then after 5 years, we're not saying that it's going to go back to where it was before the increase. It's going to stay at that 5 years.
And then also the PUC, because obviously we had to go before them a number of times, as was relayed. Initially, our board only authorized a 1-year increase in order for us to come back and convince them that we had a viable request to expand it to 5 years, which the PUC ordered. But the PUC is also going to be monitoring, as they do, our income, our expenditures, our obligations. I mean, they have required certain reports of us on a regular basis moving forward as a result of their approval of the 5-year tariff. And I'm sure that if there's a need for adjustment, they will be the ones certainly that will be monitoring this and come back to direct us. I'm sure if they determine we're taking in an excessive amount of money that we're not dedicating to anything in particular of what was originally authorized, I'm sure they'll probably be the first ones to knock on our door and maybe look at rate adjustments. It may be, as they do with GPA on fuel issues, they may determine that it needs to be adjusted lower because we're taking in more than anticipated or desired for identified projects.
Well, and I appreciate that because that really was where I was going, that if at a certain point they were seeing that you're taking in excessive revenue.
Or that we have more volume coming in that increases our revenue stream.
That's right.
Which may be possible as well, assuming the actual buildup moves forward.
And there is a potential for rate increases could go down. In other words, it won't be a steady climb upward forever.
And that's also why, as you see, from what originally was a 7% across the board 5 years, that was the initial discussion that we had when we first went and ventured out on this issue. And when our consultants and their consultants collectively reviewed it, they said, no, we believe we can accommodate the initial 7% and then actually towards the end of this 5 years, reduce it to a 1% increase. So that actually contributed to that decrease towards the end rather than across the board 7% every year for a 5-year period.
I appreciate that answer. And just in your favor, though, there is a special note that I want to make that in the way this bill is written, there was at the very beginning a deletion of the existing law, a repeal of the existing law, and within that, really the interest rate was set at 9%. Under the proposed law, or the proposed legislation, it's at 7%, so it actually comes down. And then, of course, the good author had actually asked that maybe is there a possibility to come down to 6%. So again, I just needed to make mention of that for those who were not aware or maybe watching these proceedings, that really this does bring the interest rate down from where it is in existing law right now. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for your presentation. It's very helpful. I listened to the former presentation and the informational briefing that was held a couple months ago. So I noticed that the big change was that $8 million gantry crane is not included anymore in the list of projects. And so your explanation as to how you would fund that, I just had one question on that, and that is it's going to be by separate bond, perhaps up to, what was the amount that you said, Senator Brown?
Well, right now we have estimates that may, again, we're not going to know for sure until we actually go out on bid, but it's estimated it could cost between $11 to $12 million to purchase a new gantry crane.
All right. Does that separate bond require legislative approval? All right. And
It also requires PUC approval.
all right. And you were saying that you were hoping to do this within the year, but this bond that we're looking at today is your priority to go first?
They're both priorities. It's just that you're looking at two different markets.
And funding mechanisms. But it is something that we'd like to see within the next year, so it might come maybe a year after here to the legislature. Again, it's the whole vetting process leading up to the draft legislation, but it is something that we do see as a priority, and we don't want that to fall by the wayside because we very much believe that the replacement of Gantry 3 is critical. And just because we have equipment, you're always going to have, not because it breaks down, but because regular maintenance has to be done on each of these gantries. And in order to do that right now, and I know Mr. Candeletta can elaborate if you'd like him to, right now they're almost trying to pull between Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the maintenance work on a single crane in order to do their repairs.
That's why I was curious why it was removed. Okay. And I want to congratulate you on receipt of this Tiger Grant. I guess it was very competitive, so congratulations to all of you. And but regarding the Tiger Grant, could you tell us what did you promise, or what do you have to promise in order to get that grant? What are did you promise certain uses of Hotel Wharf or certain terms? Yeah.
With regards to the Tiger Grant, we didn't promise anything other than our formal application to them for the intended uses of Hotel Wharf. The grant has actually, we have received the grant. We are now in the process of formalizing our agreement on moving forward in terms of our schedule for construction. And again, all of that is dependent upon assuming we have approval from the legislature to move forward with bond financing. We have a schedule in place. For example, things like the engineering design, when we originally put that together to apply for the Tiger Grant, which required these projects to be shovel-ready in order to even apply, the engineering designs have since been outdated. Our local law requires a one-year period from the time of actual stamping of these documents to actual construction. And so those are the type of things we're getting lined up so that we can execute that. There's no special accommodation with regards to the grant.
What about the purpose?
As we relate, it will be a multi-purpose use wharf that can be used for a variety of activities that don't require the use of our gantry cranes. So if a vessel has its own ship gear on board, it can unload cargo. If we bring the ro-ro vessels there, on average, sometimes Guam, believe it or not, we get 600 or 700 brand new cars that actually stay on the island. Somebody's buying them. The ro-ro vessels, for example, can discharge there. As we discuss the issues and challenges we have with aggregate and other types of material like that going into our yard, that can be taken down to Hotel Wharf and either loaded or unloaded.
All right, thank
and
you.
Cruise ships as well, as was discussed, because it has such a major impact on the operations of the commercial cargo with the gantry cranes. It would be much easier for security requirements and everything else to have those vessels come in and be accommodated at Hotel Wharf.
All right.
And accessibility as well for the passengers on board.
Describe the uses of the Hotel Wharf. The presentation did in general, and the chairman's testimony did also. So I would just like to compare those to what actual uses you put in writing in your grant application. So if you could just submit that.
We could certainly submit the application for the grant. If you want to see that application to the grant, we can provide that to you.
Particularly just the uses that
Not a problem. They can. If you just want that portion excerpted, our planning division can provide that to you.
All right.
And to the committee if you want that for your reference.
Yes.
If I can add to Mr. Vice Speaker. One of the things too, as we mentioned before, we've applied for the Tiger Grant several times. In the past, we've taken the angle that because of the port's limited resources, we're looking at 75-25 cost share type of commitment from the port. However, this time I think that we were a little bit more successful is because of the port's commitment to the actual overall cost. There's a $10 million Tiger grant, and this time the port is going to put in $14.2 million. So from the federal perspective, they're saying that, hey, you know, the port is looking at this as a critical project, and their buy-in into the project shows that they're willing to put this kind of money out. So that's one of the reasons why we're also successful.
And I also want to point things like, because it is a federal grant, things like Buy America requirements and things of that nature for the materials, the steel, those requirements would be put in the grant, but that's pretty standard for federal. I mean, Federal Highway has certain requirements to that nature as well with regards to road construction. So those type of parameters we will be required to meet. We actually did have 4 officials from MERIT that were on island last Thursday specifically to go through the grant proposal with us, what we need to do to address finalizing the agreement, the timelines, the schedule. They are actively tracking this issue as we are to ensure that we have the proper execution and implementation of this project and to ensure that we actually are capable of absorbing this particular grant and completing it within the timelines that the grant has required of us.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add one thing? The actual application, you did ask as to whether or not we could provide it, and we are going to provide it to you. But for those watching or listening, just so that they know, the application is readily available on the port's website.
Oh, then
to be
I
seen.
can find it there.
But for your purpose, ma'am, we'll
no, that's
do
okay. Yeah, if it's on the website, that's great. All right. All right. All right, my other questions were regarding the administration building, and the presentation talked about the needs of the tenants. And what tenants do you currently have in that building right now, in your current admin building? I mean, we were told, we've seen Matson has its own building. And
you want numbers or, well, types of tenants? Basically, they're agents and carriers, as well as...
Yeah, which ones?
APL, MSA, Inchcape, Mailline, CTSI, PACDIM, Cabras Marine, and Ambit, as well as Customs.
And Customs, okay. And do you have a design for your new building?
No, we do not, Senator. That's one of the things.
Would you have a list of items that you are insisting would be included in this building? How'd you come up with the cost estimate?
Basically, what we did was we identified all the existing spaces, all the office spaces at the port, the admin building, the admin annex, the law enforcement, port police building, as well as the office spaces being used by our superintendents and their administrative staff throughout the yard, and came up with that number. Again, it was just a conceptual number put together to determine a price. Now, as we undertook this endeavor, we came to realize, initially, we tried to do this. We tried to bring in a firm to place us in a position where we have more known information so that when we do come before you, we could present these plans and conceptually as well as the numbers. But what happened was it came down to basically the timing of spend. Local monies, it was determined internally that local monies will not be used for this purpose. So we are going to wait till the bond proceeds are available to get the ball rolling in that regard. So in the areas that were identified, the 2 areas, obviously much civil work will be needed to render the sites, I guess, ready to construct. But at that point in time, when we do know more specifics on the civil works and as well as those other aspects of construction, we will have an idea as to conceptually what can be built. But as for to determine the needs, your existing admin building is currently occupied by the port, 68%. 68% of that building is occupied by the port, for the port. And then the remainder is our tenants. And of the tenants listed, you're looking at a rent roll of approximately $200,000 a year. What we envision at the commercial division, at commercial, is basically as important as it is to accommodate the needs of the port administratively, the operational requirements, we want to try and position ourselves. I know there may be concerns with competition, but our charge is to make money as well. And we want to affect commerce, and we want to have it basically, as Mr. Santos has said, channeled down in Cabras, channeled in Pili, so our tenants, our users, our customers do not have to come throughout, but basically have your all things related to your maritime commerce industry be down in Cabras.
I understand that. I guess I'm curious about the plan and what was represented to PUC. Is the port expecting to raise the amounts that the tenants have to pay in order to cover costs for this building, maintenance? It's not going to be covered by this bond, that type of thing?
I think all of those things will be looked at. I mean, right now, we have a certain fee that they contribute for the maintenance of the general areas that are shared, and those details as we move forward, and even knowing for sure, we have some tenants right up front that would say, yes, we do want to lease in a new facility because of the proximity and the location. As was mentioned earlier, it was unfortunate that we did lose Matson. They have a very beautiful building, but I bet deep down they would still prefer to be as close to the port in terms of operational capacity as they were before. It's just simply we were not able to provide the quality of facility, the deterioration of the building. The cracks that they're talking about are not little cosmetic cracks in the floor. They're actually unevenness to the floor structure now that's happening in the foundation. But I do want to point out, Senator, with regards to, it's not an uncommon process for an autonomous agency to lease space. If you look at the Guam Airport Authority.
No, I understand. And that
no, I just want to relate. The Airport Authority.
Is there a plan for this new building? It's going to be a $17 million investment, so I just want to know if there is a plan as to how much income it would produce, because you said that currently your rentals are bringing in 24% of the port's revenue, overall revenues, and and then I've heard in other testimony that this building would increase rental for the port, and is that because we're going to have bigger capacity or because we're going to charge more? What is it?
To put things in perspective, and I do appreciate the question.
I just was wondering if there's a plan already made for this building. It sounds like there's not yet.
Well, it's kind of putting the chicken before the egg. Which comes first? I mean, if we don't have the funding to even begin to do the design work and get the full assessment of interested tenants, of course we can't build an impossibly huge building that we can't properly fund or maintain, or because of the constraints, and there are physical constraints to the properties of the port, of what would be the most feasible location to construct the building. I mean, all of those factors would need to be taken into consideration. But with regards to the ability to lease, I mean, as Mr. Nelson relayed, having a consolidated facility where a lot of these services can be readily provided to customers is a critical infrastructure we already provide. We're simply wanting to enhance that by building a new, safer, more modern facility that can accommodate meeting space as well, because currently we don't have that capacity in the building for staff or for tenants that may want to or jointly use such space. If you go up to the new Waterworks and Power
I understand,
Authority,
and I'm imagining
Senator,
those
I just wanted to elaborate to clarify for others that may also have the concern. I mean, I don't think we're going to ever be or have a need to build anything as big as that facility, but definitely the need for upgraded facilities as well as security for our operations, our computer systems. I mean, the list is endless with regards to the impact to those concerns. But no, do we have a laid out plan and design that we can show you? Can we tell you the exact amount of square footage for the building at this point?
No, not that. I just want to know.
We don't have that.
How we intend to increase revenues, rental revenue. That's
I'm tracking, Senator, and again, I appreciate the question. But with regards to rentals, you got Public Law 3019 from Senator Haddad many years ago, and it basically requires the board to conduct a triannual assessment of our rental rates, office, warehouse, open space, and for the most part, and trying to put things in perspective, is that existing building, new building, it's done based on an appraisal, and it's basically done using the methodologies that are out in place to determine the appraised value or comparables. And our last iteration, which was the latter part of last year, we sponsored an evaluation, and our building, as old as it is, and our rent structure in its current form, we're basically told we're pricing ourselves out of market. So there is that control mechanism in 3019 that basically, with our partners in 3052, again, from Senator Grada and the PUC, is that balance where we are told to get the triennial assessments. It's not up to the port to actually sit down and determine what the rates are to be for our tenants as they come in. As these rates are adopted by the board, they are in turn must be approved by the PUC.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. According to the news article that I read, there was a cost-benefit analysis published when applying for the grant for the Hotel Wharf, I guess for the Tiger grant, so maybe that would be also on the website. I guess that's what I was looking for, is if there was any such analysis done for this admin building or something like that. But I wanted to know also from PUC if, I don't know, Mr. Haraki, if you could answer this. If this legislation is passed and it says that the PUC will review the issuance terms and conditions of the bonds. Is the PUC at that point, and that it again has to approve these bonds after PUC's already approved the tariff increase, and as your testimony states, the tariff increase were in support of these bonds, to support the repayment of a bond. But so what review is PUC going to be doing, and is that going to allow, let's say, an additional tariff increase at that time? If they come back, I mean, what is that additional review by PUC going to accomplish, I guess? After we're putting terms in statute, GITA, is GITA involved in this bond issuance? Yes, because the fee's going to GITA. And so then PUC reviews it again and approves it again. And I know you're doing oversight for the tariff increases already. So I guess I just want to know, what is that additional review of this bond, the bond terms and conditions going to accomplish for all of us, for the people of Guam?
Yeah, normally before the issuance of the bond, you know, if the legislature passes this legislation, it comes back to the PUC, and we would review aspects such as the interest rate, try to determine what impact there would be on the ratepayers, and sometimes we're even more specific about setting a target rate for interest rate, or with a refunding for savings rate, which we just did with GWA. But to more directly answer your question.
No, that's exactly what I want to know. If you've already approved the tariff increase, the rate increase, haven't you already considered the impacts to the consumer and all of those questions that you just rose? I mean, that's weren't those already considered and before? I mean, because I am very curious. It's very curious to me that this bill is here after the rate increase was approved to pay for a bond. Now we're getting the bill in front of us to approve a bond. So it's my understanding this has never been done before, that normally we approve the bond and then they approve the rate increase or I don't know.
I think the rate increase was, of course, it was looking at the possibility that there would be a bond, but that wasn't the only consideration.
And an interest rate that was analyzed, because there was a lot of analysis done by the PUC and your consultants, and so I guess I'm trying to figure out what are we going to analyze again? If they've already analyzed rate increases based on certain percentage for, you know, bond interest rates, things like that. Don't we have those kind of parameters that the PUC could tell us directly our bill, you know, meets those parameters, or that you had envisioned, or it does not? Or, you know, do we have to incur additional costs for additional analysis after we've passed this bill?
Well, the problem is, of course, normally the way this process has always worked in the past, it's true. The legislature passes an authorization for a bond, and then the PUC acts at such time as the utility comes before it. Here, I think the rate increase, I mean, in general, it did contemplate the possibility of a bond issuance, but that wasn't the only factor either. It's been known for a long time that these loans were existing and would have to be addressed through a rate increase. So I think it wasn't only looking at the bond. That's my point. It was looking at the outstanding loans, you know, the needs of the port, because if the bond weren't approved, in fact, rate increases could even be steeper, I suppose, in that if the port didn't have a way to finance, you know, these improvements, it would presumably have to do so with loans, further loans, or require additional revenue and rate increases. But one thing I wanted to mention, with the 5-year rate increase, we have an annual true-up. So every year, after a rate increase is granted, the port would come back to the PUC, as Director Brown, GM Brown mentioned that, and we conduct, it's not a full rate case, but kind of a mini rate case, in which all aspects are looked at, such as revenues, expenses, operations, and the PUC can adjust rates at any time if there's something in the formula that's not working. Let's say, for example, a bond issuance weren't approved. Well, that could impact the rates too, but then the PUC would, at the next annual true-up, determine if the rates that had been approved in the 5-year plan were still appropriate or not. So my point is, they can always be adjusted. Okay. They are adjusted with all the utilities, depending on the particular circumstances.
And is it possible that after passage of the bill, this bill, that the rates could be increased because of the borrowing?
Well, it's certainly possible, because the problem with the bond issuance, we don't know the terms until they actually go to market.
That's why.
And we've struggled with this at the PUC, but what we've done in some cases is actually have a provision that the utility has to contact the chairman, our chairman, at the time of issuance, so we know exactly what the interest rate is, and other aspects. It's because it's really only then that we can assess the exact impact on rates, and that's our main concern in monitoring everything about the utilities. It's what's the rate impact.
I guess that's why I'm trying to cut down any cost for additional analysis, and if we could follow your original analysis for the current rates, then I think that would just save some time and hopefully money, I'm hoping, in analysis, but I'm not sure.
I think I would probably ask or request that you not take us out of the review process, because we think that is a valuable function that we perform, to be able to look after legislation is passed, because of course, you know, aspects of this bill could pass if you lower the interest rate from 7 to 6.
Yes.
So I think it is a very valuable aspect to have the PUC review after the legislation's passed.
All right. But PUC will maintain review of the rates, so they still have that regardless.
Yes, that's right.
And I promise I only have a couple more questions, Mr. Chairman. Just one is, PUC, when you approve these loans, you approve these loans that the port took out? That's correct.
Yes.
These underwent PUC approval also, but at that time, the rates were not adequate to cover these loans?
Well, I think our consultants have taken the view that for the last 30 years probably, the rates of the port were never sufficient to support their operations. I mean, in general, they were always too low, and in fact, the port probably didn't usually request as high a rate increases as they should have. On the individual loans, I think I mentioned we have something called the contract review process. So any expenditure that or loan obligation, I'm sorry, not just expenditure. If it's a loan obligation with a bank that exceeds $1 million, then the port has to come before the PUC for approval. And at that time, generally, we look at the loan, we assess what it's for, and try to come up with a determination whether it'll impact rates or not. But in general, as I said, we knew there was upward pressure on the rates with regard to the port.
Yeah, I guess because the language that I've read doesn't describe us, including the loans here, as a refinancing to get a more affordable. It said specifically that this bond was necessary to pay those because they exceeded the port's ability to pay those loans off.
Well, that could be accurate.
Okay. And I guess my final, what do you envision the timeline if this bill's passed, Senator Brown, to implement, particularly when I look at the list of projects, and especially when the gantry crane was there, I thought, oh, maybe we should be going from the bottom up, right, to take care of the repairs, the safety issues, but what do you foresee for that admin building? I mean, and we were talking at the last hearing about construction costs being at record highs right now because of the labor issues. And so I just was wondering if that also plays into the board's consideration.
I'm sure it can. I mean, we're on the optimistic side, hoping that with the bigger issues of Guam's economy and the construction industry, that there'll be some resolution somehow, some way with regards to the worker visa program, because at the end of the day, it's going to make construction probably very, very expensive, or probably very difficult, if not impossible, for certain projects to move forward. We do have the timeline in place, assuming that the legislature does pass this legislation. I don't know if you were to entertain it, would it be entertained later this month? Hopefully, in our schedule, if it was entertained by October, we would already have a schedule in place to go out to the bond financing market. That would take a couple of months or more to get all these details. We'd have to go back to the PUC for review. Once the trigger starts where the bond funds are released and we can actually go out and package these projects, because the port does have delegated authority for construction, we would move simultaneously on all of these projects. There might be a number of contractors or different contractors that can be able to come on board to execute these projects, and we would like to facilitate getting these projects off the ground as soon as possible. As of course, meeting the bid timelines and all those other requirements that are necessary. But as soon as the funds are released, we would like to move simultaneously on all these projects.
All right. Is there someone who would make a decision that it's best to put them off until the labor issues are resolved or changed? Because I just remember being in here also for the Airport Authority's bond. We had like an informational briefing on that, and their project list, they were not able to address the list at all.
And we probably would not know, Senator, until we actually went out for bid and that we got an actual idea. I mean, there are some major companies on Guam. They're not the majority, but there are companies on Guam that do have their own employees that probably could bid on this project and still be able to provide that labor. But we're probably not going to know for sure until we actually issue out a bid and see what the feedback and the cost is. If we find out so outstandingly high that we can't afford it, then maybe that's something that has to go back to the drawing board and come back here and say, the bid price is way beyond what we can finance. Then that's something that we'll come back to the table about.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to thank everyone at Port Authority of Guam for all the hard work they do. I just have one question. Just to understand the PUC docket, this 7% general increase effective June 1st, 2017, have you already raised the tariff to 7%? Okay. And perhaps is there going to be a study of an analysis, because in the docket there is a proposed tariff impact on consumer prices on Figure 2, but it doesn't really address a lot of the perishable goods. And so is there going to be an impact statement as far as how much the goods, how much stores are selling the goods as opposed to the consumer price impact that was given for the PUC docket? This one right here, Senator, this one.
I can have Glenn elaborate, but I want to point out with regards to the actual charge of commodities that are in the stores, That may or may not be impacted directly with regards to the cost of bringing that in, because we do have competing carrier interests.
Yes.
Some of those goods that we noticed on the shelves that were raised, it was claimed, well, because of the cost of shipping, we've increased the rates, and some not by a few cents, some by many dollars.
And that's my
and now that they
concern.
do have competing
And
interests,
Senator,
we're
that's
not
my-
seeing a reduction in the cost of goods
Thank
anyway.
you. Okay.
But I just want to, I know Glenn will elaborate further, but the reference that the cost of goods on the shelves, how that gets, how that gets computed by companies that sell these products is not always tied into what the cost of just transportation is.
Yes, and that's my concern, right? Perhaps they see it, oh, the port is increasing 7% tariff on the goods, and so now it's our reason to increase prices. And so I just wanted to know, is there check and balances in place for anything active in what the port is doing to help ensure the local economy?
We can account for.
I'm not done yet. Thank you, Senator.
We can account for our costs.
I'm not done yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Thank
I'm
you,
sorry.
Senator.
God forbid I intercede on a senator. I have a bad habit of doing that. It must be old habits.
Thank you. Just to ensure the local economy that, okay, these tariffs are being raised, but the port is being active in, ensuring that, there's a fair balance somewhere within the market. That's all.
And Senator, we appreciate the question, but I'm glad Senator Brown answered that, because my mouth will get me in trouble. But basically, the port has no authority to determine the price structures that are of any commodity brought in through the public cargo terminal as they're placed on the store shelves. One thing we can say is that 7%, although already in place, basically equates to this: an additional $27 per can, loaded can, that comes off the ships and onto the docks. $27 per can. Now you spread that amongst $150,000 worth of commodities within that can. And that's where our role came in, to try and determine what is our impact, or that impact of the 7% on the actual activity, which is bringing in the can and the goods. And I know we keep saying it's a mere fraction of a penny, but basically the reality is just that. The tariff increase does result, when applied to a loaded can, $27 each.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Senator, I'm glad you said possibility of another month. I really had some questions about, Senator Adder raised some questions that I was concerned about. This amount of 80 and the $2 million facelift, as opposed to a complete replacement of the buildings that you showed in the pictures, where the rebar was exposed, and one testified that you'd have to go in football uniform to. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
No, we understand, and again, Senator, these were the estimated cost on repairs to the spalling. We did see success with regards to the CFS warehouse, where MARID administered and DOD funds were used to do repairs on that. So again, all these facilities were constructed at the same time. And so far, in terms of those spalling repairs that were actually made to the CFS building, it's held, and it's been several years now. So we understand that. The main issues with regards to the warehouses definitely is the leaking roofs and the spalling issue. Those things are repairable at this time. I mean, we did do an assessment on the building, because of course you want to ensure the structural integrity of the building. We don't want to be patching it up and it's intended to fall apart. We're not adverse at all to having further discussion if there's adjustments that can be made to increase for those repairs that can still fall within an acceptable ceiling for bond authorization. We are open, and we certainly could dialogue with you and your committee and with Senator Uggan to look at those figures and see how we can come to what would be a comfortable medium on that.
Please, because I mean, I know you don't think that I'd listen to the testimony, but when the testimony says it's buckling,
and we agree.
That to me is not.
And we
that's
agree.
not spalling.
I mean, the fact that
buckling means
yes,
it's falling.
Well, and the fact that we have a team going around tapping concrete to have it fall apart in some organized fashion so it's not falling on people and employees and tenants, because we do have tenants in these facilities. I think we understand the significance of it. We're not opposed at all if it can work within an acceptable ceiling that still falls within what we can afford to put more money towards that. You're not going to get an objection from me on that. I mean, it's long awaiting. 50 years to do repairs to the building is a long time, very long time.
And when there's 80, I would much rather know that it's going to a capital improvement building. And the other thing, the other question that Senator Abbott raised that really concerned me was that there's been no discussion between yourselves and Customs about the fact that they need a enclosed warehouse to quarantine containers.
Mr. Speaker, I know prior to my time when there was the bigger proposal on the table, the $250 million proposal on the table, there were discussions to actually construct such a facility. Of course, the expectation was that the federal government was going to pay for that. And like I said, I've had preliminary proposals for that issue, but we've never had a formal request from Customs. And again, until I have something formal from them, it's a little difficult to sit down and get into the details. That's not something the port desires to fund. I'll be upfront with that. We have enough facilities that we need to address the maintenance of, and as I mentioned, Customs charges for their service. Customs receives revenue from the Port Authority operation that they have there, but they do not and have not, at least in our time frame, ever contributed financially to the their operations or their cost of doing business at the port in terms of their rent, their power, their water, their telephone service. The port pretty much has, for whatever reason, unfortunately, absorbed that cost to keep them in operation. They're essential to what we need to do. But Customs also has a mechanism for grants and other things that they can pursue to fund that project. And that's something, should and when and if they want to present that to us, we will be more than happy to sit down and talk to them. But jurisdictionally, that is something that falls in their oversight. And I can't account, and it's not my place to speak on behalf of Customs as to why they've not formalized that. I have to defer to them.
And I have a meeting scheduled with them.
Okay.
To discuss. And I want to commend the port for correctly having a relationship with Customs, understanding that they are essential to your operation, and that you and the island will be destroyed if we don't have Customs down there.
And
so
no argument
it's essential, and they should not be charged. I'm not happy with the fact that they are charged at the airport. I think that's a crime.
I can't argue that, Senator. As I mentioned, they are also revenue generating just as we are. And in all fairness,
I understand,
in all fairness.
But the thing is that we all know that your operation can't go forward without them, and they shouldn't be charged for being there. They're part of the port operations, and the same thing with the airport. So I want to correct that problem up at the airport at some point. I've been trying to. But the thing is that I have discussions with them. It's my understanding that there is some money federally that can come from the federal government for the building of this enclosed warehouse. The spread of invasive species, it has to be contained. And so I'd like some discussion about where and how this container can be, this container warehouse can be placed down there. I know Senator Ada had another question, and then your oversight chair.
Thank you, and then I'll be done. First of all, when the Invasive Species Fund was established, in their impact analysis, they actually had computed in there $750,000 a year for a debt service on one of these buildings. So that might be a funding source for this thing. The problem is they need space. The second thing is I would ask, Mr. Chairman, that the port provide formally a figure, a cost estimate of replacing the EQMR and the Warehouse 1 buildings, as well as, of course, you said 3.4 million to rehabilitate F1, but maybe include that, and it could be made a part of the committee report. And finally, I've looked through the bill, and Public Law 30-57 has placed a debt ceiling on the port of, I believe, 54 million, of which you've already eaten up 20 million. So that's probably, that's something that we're going to need to take a look at to repeal that and establish a new debt ceiling. Okay, thank you very much.
And Mr. Chairman, within the time frame that we have, we certainly can get at least our in-house engineering estimate on potential cost per square footage, quantifying the size of the existing warehouses and what that could cost. We could, it's going to be an astronomical figure, but we will provide that.
Please, because I would like that 15 million eaten someplace else than.
We totally agree. I mean, at the end of the day, we all want to have comfort that this bond is going into tangible infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In light of the request for additional information, Senator Brown, please, if we can get your assistance and provide that as quickly as possible. I was going to put out a call out to the Speaker to see if by any chance he can complete the committee report for possible discussion and placement of this proposal on the agenda next week. But based on the request for additional information, certainly if you can provide that to the committee as quickly as possible. Also, in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, once that information is provided, I'd like to ask for your consideration to work on the report as expeditiously as possible, because we all acknowledge, considering the bond market and the opportunities and the rates, that time is certainly money. If we want to maximize the best or acquire the best interest on behalf of the Port Authority of Guam and the people of Guam, we need to capitalize on the market as quickly as possible. So I certainly hope that with your assistance, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, and with the concurrence of the members of the body, that we will give the Port Authority that opportunity to be able to go out, acquire this financing, address some of their critical infrastructure requirements, and then certainly perhaps consider some of the other aspects that have been discussed today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And as much as they said they can deal with an October 1, your call out is unnecessary. It won't be ready for next week. We need all that information.
Sure.
The Vice Speaker has requested considerable amount of information, and I think that list has to be finalized.
I understand, Mr. Speaker, but my request is consideration that once that information is presented to the committee and to the members of this body, that we certainly consider holding a session specifically to address it so that we can at least acquire the best market, bond interest market. And we also know that this will have to go through the POC for further review before they go out to the bond market. So that's all part of the entire process, and we need to recognize that. If the body is going to decide to provide the Port Authority of the Guam with the requested amount or the authorization to go out to the bond market and get money for improvement of their infrastructure, then certainly we need to, on our part, we owe it to the Port Authority and we owe it to the people of Guam to decide on this piece of legislation at the earliest time possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And Mr. Chairman, with regards, I mean, we will have our engineering division work on those estimates. And again, this doesn't limit the repairs to the existing warehouse. There are additional things that can be added on in terms of what those cost estimates can be to further enhance Warehouse 1 and EQMR. We'll include that. I know if there's anything more that the Vice Speaker needs with regards to our Tiger grant, you know, we have it online, but if there's anything more, please contact, or you can contact Mr. Nelson directly. There's additional information. And Mr. Duenas will provide formally, or through his signature or mine, the formal transmittal of the information that he provided you earlier, so that you have that officially available for your committee.
Your testimony and the testimony of your employees was persuasive enough that you've raised our concern about the safety of the employees.
And
so
we don't disagree with you, sir. We just simply tried to prioritize what we can afford at the end of the day. And again, this does not exhaust the list of needs at the port, but it's what they presented as the most critical.
Is it possible to take off some of those loans and instead have capital improvement projects instead of repayment?
That can be done. I mean, it just adds on to the debt list. I mean, it just adds on, and to what degree, you know, we can generate revenue to pay for. I'd love to do it all, but it's a question of
No,
what can
I
we afford.
understand, but the thing is
unfortunately,
you posed to us the safety question.
Sure.
It wasn't I that.
No, I understand.
It is imperative that we pay off those loans to free up the collateral on the revenues that is being pledged to service those loans. We would get a better rate from the bond market if those loans were extinguished, so that the revenues would be dedicated to the bond. And
But there's only one loan that has a interest rate less than what the chairman was asking. Is possible taking it down to 6.
There's
and
a
that's
difference.
$2 million.
No. There is a difference between the interest rate and the calculation of net present value. The interest rate is what it is, and that is used to do calculations. The formula for net present value is something else. Like one of the loans here has a net present value of 11%, which is the loan for the gantry crane. The other 2 loans have net present value in excess of 3%, which also exceeds the net present value floor. So that's why those 3 loans would be paid off. The 4th loan does not have a net present value of 2% or less. That loan would be paid off by the Port Authority.
All right, anything else, Mr. Chairman?
I just want to express once again my humble thanks for giving your time and effort in hearing our testimony this morning, and hoping and praying that you approve this 157-34 so the port can continue to move. Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Again, also just to elaborate on our chairman's comments, we appreciate the time. I know it's been quite a few hours, and thank you very much for giving us the time to present our issues to you and requesting support on this bill. Thank you.
Okay. With that, the committee is recessed until 2 o'clock when we have a hearing on another matter. Thank you.